I'll do all the silence cuts outs afterwards. Oh, I'll get the computer to do it for me anyway. So, but Scott, hello. Do you want to do a quick intro for those that haven't seen you before? Because this is like a formal guest request, I guess you could say.
Okay, ridiculously quick. Danny, I've been a fan of yours for a long time. I'm a martial arts coach out in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, originally from Scotland. And we opened a gym about 4 years ago with the whole endeavor to be as wholly as ecological as we can, using the ecological approach. And I have been head in the books trying to catch up and change my whole worldview, which it is a whole worldview to change. And it has been a struggle in many ways doing that. And this is the reason I wanted to come on the conversation today. I think you do, and you and John have had some wonderful conversations. And I think I told you I'm going to shower you with compliments today. I think you're a wonderful educator and here to listen and ask a bunch of questions that might help me in my community. I run my own podcast, and it was always my endeavor to bridge a gap between the academic shelves and the mats in the dojo. And I don't know how effective I've been at that because I'm still trying to understand a lot of it myself. So that's my intro.
Yeah, John, is there anything you want to add before we start just riffing? Because who knows where the conversation will go.
Oh, it'll go over. It's interesting you were mentioning about in your introduction. We have just recorded an episode that is so linked to what we were just like to what you were introduced, like just trying to bridge the gap and fill in that information and learning all the new things and all of that. I was just thinking, yeah, that's kind of like what we were talking about literally 2 hours ago as well of that.
So for a bit of context, Scott, because obviously you weren't in that conversation, I listened to a conference from the OECD, which was about educational research and trying to use it trying to engage with it rather than just use it, because researchers love doing research and then they publish it and then they go do the next thing. Well, the teachers, practitioners, policymakers are stuck with the, okay, how do I use this? How do I actually do anything with it problems? And the conference discussed various issues, didn't really give any answers or solutions. To be honest, it just created more questions. But we were talking about how to engage with the research rather than just pluck out a bit that you understand or pluck out a bit that you sort of resonate with or you get and just blanket introduce it, which is what I feel a lot of coaches from my experience in football, trampoline, other sports do. They look at research and go, oh, that's cool. I like that. I'll take that. I'll forget the theory and the background literature and all the context, but I'll take that little bit and I'll use that. I don't know whether that resonates with you, but that's what we discussed earlier, and what we're trying to avoid is the take the bit they like and leave the rest, because that I don't think is very useful with the ecological approach, because it's not like you can just take direct perception and leave everything else, or I guess more accurately, take the constraints and leave direct perception is, I imagine, what normally happens.
Well, it definitely resonates with me, and I think I'm probably guilty of cherry picking. But the opposite side of that coin is that when I feel I'm getting a good grasp of it, I'll read something else that's kind of contrary. I was speaking to you recently about, I've come across Carl Friston's work and Andy Clark on the free energy principle, and I'm like, these are incredibly smart guys, and they have a different perspective. And I'm like, so I reached out, and a little bit more context there, John, is that you were one of your podcasts or conversations a month or so ago. You were talking about putting these into these video graphics and making these videos, say maybe a Rob Gray's book and that Julia and Jeff's book on Intro to Eco Psych. I think that would be wonderful because, again, I think you do a very good job of communicating that. And so the questions I have for you today, I think, are not just from me, but probably from the community itself, because there's a really growing appetite for this kind of content in my community. And I understand because I've been there too. I'm just a little further along than them, just because I've been researching it longer and reading to it longer. But there's a lot of misunderstanding, and it's completely forgivable. I mean, it's really turning your world upside down, and I don't think that's like hyperbole to say that. It's a completely different worldview, and what's happened for me is there's still remnants of the kind of cognitive stuff, and I get them mismatched, and then I read something else, so it comes a bit of a mismatch, and I end up being a bullshitter. And there's enough bullshit in my sport. I'm trying to. I think we all bullshit. I don't think bullshit is necessarily lying, but I want to keep the bullshit as. I don't want to contribute to that mountain of bullshit. If that makes sense. And if I use some salty language today, that's You know, I am Scottish and I worked at sea for years, so I apologize.
Yeah, that's fine. It's mildly amusing. I'm writing, so one of the many things that I do, I'm writing a script, or I've written a script about misinformation online, and it's specifically directed at YouTube videos. And I use the term Frankfurtian bullshit because that's what is spoken about in academia when it comes to bullshit. And it's basically saying something that's said that's vacuous. So there's either lack of thought or lack of intelligence behind it. And I don't think it's a bad thing to bullshit, but I think it's a bad thing to justify the bullshit without any rationale or evidence behind it. That to me is where I start getting irritated. So when it comes to the conversation of the free energy principle, when you say Andy Clark's extended cognition, if
Right.
I'm
Sure. But the paper I just chewed through and wrote about was applying like the trying to marry or find some overlap between the active inference, free energy principle, and ecological dynamic approach, and that's what kind of got me down. I don't know if you're aware of that paper.
I'm
And
aware
again,
of a lot of papers.
yeah. So again, I a lot of it makes sense when I read it from that perspective. So we've got our pants off here. Quick, one quick question, Danny. This will mean a lot to me. Do you have any doubt? I'm sure there's a little bit of doubt, right? But do you have any doubt that perception is not direct, as it pertains to perception action, at least?
As you say, do I have doubt? Yes, I have doubt, but there is far less doubt in my belief in direct perception than there is in indirect perception. So I believe more in direct perception than indirect. Hopefully that answers the question.
It does. I think again, and I've made that mistake myself, is saying, okay, we've got this. Perception is direct, and we go in and we tell everyone, we make this factual statement that perception is direct. And I've been talking about being was it you that told me not to be agnostic or pick a side kind of thing? And that's because of my maybe lack of full understanding, that I can tend to be a bit wishy-washy, and I'm trying to be reasonable, and I'm trying to think critically, but I end up just having this fence post up my ass, and I'm over both sides, so. But I'm definitely more on the direct perception side. And these are some of the I have 3 or 4 different topics that I'd like you to maybe flesh out today, that I think that's the biggest struggles for my community to really wrap their heads around. Direct perception is probably a good starting point. And interestingly, I'm watching Our Universe, this Netflix documentary with my son right now. So I don't know if this makes sense. Tell me if this makes sense, Sean. So I'm a little agnostic. I'm not sure about direct perception when I think of us as being humans. When I think of us as being animals, it makes a bit more sense. When I think of us as being organisms, yes, of course it's direct. Have you anything to say about that?
The first question, I suppose, is I hear you using 3 terms. What are the differences between those 3 terms? Like, it's as if they're kind of separate terms that you're using. There's the human, there's the animal, and then there's the organism. And so my question immediately is, what's the difference? Because a human is an organism, an animal is an organism, and an organism is an organism. But I also understand from the perspective of, like, as I am a little bit earlier on in my journey as well, it was very much like, yeah, I want to be on that side of, like, this makes sense. But I don't want to hedge my bets because I don't have all that information. So I genuinely sympathize with that feeling of like, this is really cool and it changes everything we think about what we do. But also, I don't know, but I do know. So I appreciate that. Yeah. So that was my first question. I did it in a backwards order, but that's how it works.
I agree we're organisms, but I think we tend to go around our daily business, believing we're something different. So I completely agree. We are organisms, but just whatever category we seem to be thinking about, that scale of analysis or whatever you want to call about it, that's the best way I can put it, because it does feel there's something unique about us. And then when you really think about it, well, we're just really animals. And when you really, really think about it, it says, well, we're just complex, sophisticated blobs, really.
Oh yeah.
I love the technical term there, blob.
Blobs. We are blobs.
Oh,
I think for me, the way I've been approaching it is from we are human, we are individual. So that is a thing. We are individuals, which is individual organisms as well. But if we zoom in a little bit and constrain it to be humans, for me, it's kind of like that. Okay, so we are humans, we are individual. can we both see the same thing? Can two distinct individuals see everything at the same time? And I'm like, well, I guess so, but also, but we can't, because I'm thinking something different to what you're thinking, and Danny's thinking something different to what I'm thinking. But we're all in the same environment. We're all, and we are interacting with each other. So that's kind of how I see that, like, question on direct perception. And because we are human, we are special, which is what our brains are telling us. As we're told, our brains are telling us that we are, something special. And then we have that, we all see it from very slightly different angles, which is why I kind of think direct perception is almost, to me, it feels like the only answer, because it feels like it matches what our lived experience is, which is always what I go back to. What is our lived experience? What is the thing we are doing here and now? Do I have doubts from a philosophical level? Yes, sure. We can never be certain. Not really.
That's what assumptions are in science.
Yeah, exactly.
Lack of proof.
It's just, we don't know. We don't know everything. But from my lived experience here and now, direct perception just makes sense. It feels so simple. And when I was first kind of wrangling my head around it, I was trying to complicate it. And there is complications and other things to consider and think about, but it was like, okay, this is actually quite simple. We see things and we act based on what we see, and then that loop or back and forth is almost,
I would add something in there. I wouldn't add, I would change something. When you say we see things, I would say we perceive things. Because when you say see, you're being very specific on the type of energy that you're perceiving as an organism. Because we can see visual light, obviously, but then we can hear vibrations, which is a different type of energy. And both of those types of energy can be perceived. So
Yes.
there are other organisms that can perceive without as much sight as us, but then others perceive more than us because they have more sight. So the energy at which each organism can perceive, that's like on the visual spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum, the energies across it. Some animals can see different light to us. Obviously, as humans, we can see mostly the same, but obviously then you've got colorblind people. Are they different types of people? Well, yes, if you're looking at the really niche category of can they see this color wavelength or not? And that's where I think the categories of organisms in biology anyway comes down to us. We have imparted the category on that's a mammal, that's not a mammal, that's a vegetable, that's a fruit. Like we've added linguistic barriers and constraints to the way we explain things because it makes our lives easier when we're talking. But does that mean it's accurate in the way that we can represent everything and explain everything as a holistic, I don't want to say approach because there's more to science than just an approach or looking at something. But if we do use those linguistic categories, the constraints and boundaries we've added through the language we're using, i.e. animal, human, organism, would then be imparted on the way that we explain those things, which is what happened with the traditional approach. The traditional approach uses the language constraint of human and assumes human is different from animal. Well, if human's different from animal, we must have something that animals don't. Central executive. Ecological approach says we don't have a central executive, which means animals won't have one because, well, animals and organisms and humans, in theory, should all perceive in the same way, which the ecological approach assumes. It assumes we all perceive, as in all organisms perceive in the same way. Perception for action or through action because they're coupled. Whereas the traditional approaches assume humans are different, which means there's got to be something different about us. And the different bit traditionally seen in those approaches is the central executive, whatever that means. Maybe it's the mind, which again, mind-body dualism. Is that a thing? Ecological approach says no, because the mind is the central executive, which isn't a physical thing. So how can it impact how we act? We don't know. So we just say it doesn't. It's an organism that interacts in the environment, hence organism-environment relationship, which is where the differing assumptions from the start of perception change, but we don't know which assumptions are right or wrong because, as we said, we don't have proof either way, but we choose to assume that there is no central executive. Others choose to assume there is. And that's where people can sit on the fence. And people sit on the fence because we don't know, but we can never know. We can't know if something exists or if something doesn't exist. That's where all of this stems back to. Descartes, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. The doubt comes from somewhere, therefore we must exist. Great, but how do we know the world exists? If we can't trust our senses, how do we know it exists? Because we have a mental representation given to us by a central executive that, again, we don't know exists. I'm less likely to believe that than we are directly perceiving energy that is within the environment, energy of physical, well, I say physical things, obviously coming from structured patterns of information from light sources, from vibrations, etc. So I would say, coming all the way back round, when it comes to the direct perception, the animals, organisms, humans, we are organisms that relate to the environment, and we use the information to experience existence, but whether we can prove that or not, no one's going to have an answer to that. So you've got to pick a side. Which assumption do you take? You can't really take two assumptions, in my view, anyway. Hopefully that didn't just like confuse everyone.
No, well, not confusing per se, but I think so. Jeff Wagman, when I interviewed him, he corrected me when I said we see the world as it is. He said no, we perceive the world directly, and that made a sense. So this is my kind of first sidetrack here. Perhaps there's senses, perhaps there's emotions that, as human beings, as a human organism, we're just not privy to. That's really fascinating to me. That there may be other emotions and senses out there. I mean, it's clear we don't share. There's certain senses we don't share with other organisms, and that's a fascinating thing to think about. What are we missing out on?
So my sister is in zoology. That's her field of study, which obviously is animals. And ecological psychology comes from ecology, which is studying animals in environments. So even though it is ecological psychology, it is a psychology science. We are technically doing a biological science, which Andrew Wilson has said. So when we're studying ourselves, we are an organism with constraints, like physical constraints, that other organisms don't have, which again is really exciting to see, which is why zoology, even though it is very what seems like far afield, when you look at the different mammals, the sea creatures, the birds, all the different animals, the way the eyes are structured, the way the ears work, the different energies that we can directly perceive, that's exciting. How we use the information from what other organisms can perceive to develop our own way of moving forwards it's exciting to think about, but I don't know how practical it would be because we don't have those like capabilities. We don't have those action capabilities because we're not those organisms. So theoretically and academically, very interesting. Practically speaking, I'm not so sure.
It's certainly fun to think about. So again, so let's maybe not to round it off, but with as it pertains to direct perception and representations in the mind. So I think, and certainly for me, so when we say, talk about direct perception and we don't, from the ecological perspective, we don't see representations as being a thing. I think representations, as I did, that perhaps some people are newer to this and in my community, I think that's conflated with awareness in this kind of mental picture that we all clearly have of something. Can you maybe differentiate about that and talk about what we actually mean when we talk about representational or non-representational? Because I think that would be pretty helpful. I think there's just, do you understand what I mean when I think that gets conflated?
Yeah, so when it comes to a representation, that means there's got to be something interpreted from something else, which inside of the ecological approach, when we look at, say, vision as a site, because I think that's the most used example of the visual system. If you have a retinal image, we don't see the world right to left, up, down, back to front, 3D. Like that's how we see the world, but the retinal image doesn't see that because the eye can't do that. The eye is like it's curved at the back, so we get a 2D image, but we don't see in 2D. When looking at light, obviously light travels in straight lines. So the left of me will go to the back of the right of my eye, but we don't see it back to front. And the same, the light at the top of me, it goes to the bottom of the back of my eye, but I don't see upside down. So that image, the retinal image, needs to be fixed, to use a traditional term. The fixing of the image is then our internal representation. That's what we think. We've interpreted that upside down, back to front, upside down image, 2D image, and we've made a representation, a mental representation of what we think the world looks like. Well, that's a traditional approach. But if we were to directly perceive, we don't need to do any fixing because the copy of the world doesn't need to be fixed, which means we see in 3D, we perceive in 3D, which means the mental representation isn't a representation of a fixed image because there was no image to fix. It's just experience. So there's no need to interpret or represent something because it is what it is. We see or we perceive directly. We know what it is because that's what we've perceived, and it will be unique. Every perception is unique because it's uniquely structured. The light will only be in that. So the light coming from outside my window, hitting the wall into my eye, it's only like that once. And that is my direct perception in that experience. There is no representation. There is no interpretation. It's just, that's what I see.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, it helps. It all helps.
Well, some things can make things more complex, which obviously isn't very helpful.
It helped. No, it helped me. And I asked you the question again before when I reached out to you about the free energy principle. Can you explain again? Because I think Jeff and Julia did a great job of dismantling some of the traditional assumptions in the book. But when we talk about you're talking about this retinal image doesn't need to be fixed. It's directly perceived and interpreted. Loan of intelligence. Can you explain a little bit about that and why that's problematic from traditional approaches?
Yeah. So actually, John, do you want to answer any of these questions, or are you okay me going?
You
Come on,
go.
John.
I have so many thoughts, but you go first. I don't mind. I am good. I'm very good.
Okay, I just thought I'd confirm. So empiricism is where we believe knowledge comes from, i.e., we learn through experiences. We experience the world, and that's how we gain knowledge. The traditional approach, when you first experience something, because they have this interpretation in this retinal image, because we need to fix the image, well, we need to fix the image somehow. In some way, this thing inside of our head, traditionally called the central executive, needs to use something to fix the image, which is cues and rules that we've learned from somewhere, but they don't say where. So we need to have knowledge before we can fix the image to then experience the world. But if we don't have knowledge before it, a tabula rasa, blank slate, which is the assumption, when you're born with no knowledge. Well, if you don't have knowledge, how can we create a mental representation using cues and rules? Because we've got no knowledge to make those cues and rules. So logic would suggest if we've got no knowledge beforehand, then the world is 2D, upside down and back to front. But it's not. So something, somehow, somewhere, there needs to be intelligence. There needs to be knowledge. There's a loan of intelligence to our central executive, to our mind, for us to then add and take and use the cues and rules to fix the image. So if there is no image to fix, then the loan of intelligence isn't really a problem because we've got the knowledge in the ecological approach before birth because it's experiences. We're still learning through experiences, but it's before birth. And we don't need knowledge to fix the image because there's no image to fix. So the loan of intelligence is an issue in the traditional approaches because if you don't have knowledge, well, you can't interpret and experience the world. But you can't have knowledge unless you've interpreted and experienced the world. But they both can't be true. So something's got to be wrong there. There's a paradox, really. You can't have knowledge without knowledge, but yeah, and it extends to likelihoods. So one of the ideas about fixing this this retinal image that's got problems or anything sense really, when you're trying to fix it, you may use likelihoods, which is where the Bayesian statistics and active inference modeling comes into this. Is, oh, well, if I saw this spherical shape 3 times before and it turned out to be an apple, and I saw it once before and it was an orange, if I see this spherical shape again, well, it's most likely to be an apple because it was an apple 3 times, it was an orange once, it's most likely going to be an apple. That's a very simplistic version of what Bayesian statistics is, but it's essentially just a tally. What is most likely? But if you don't already know the 3 and the 1, i.e., you don't already have knowledge to make that tally, how do you know what's most likely? So if you don't already know what's most likely, you can't know what's likely, which again is knowledge that you don't already have unless you've experienced something. But if we start with no knowledge, we can't start with a tally. So how do you then make those decisions? How do you make a decision on a tally that doesn't exist yet? It's not possible. Hence, unsolvable problems that come up in the traditional approach.
And
It's
is
going
that
back.
sorry, John, go ahead.
It's going back to that thing that Julie said. Is that glass ceiling? It's that there's a point where it stops. That you just stop. And you're like, well, how? Why? And there's no. It's almost like there's no logic to it. It's not like there's no answer because we don't have answers, but there is no real logic. It just is, and then it stops without going. Yeah, but it's not. But this. But I've seen lots of apples in my time, but I still know what an orange is. I eat lots of apples, but when I see an orange, I know it's an orange because I have that knowledge. I see what's around me. Perceive what is around me. I see that there is a bowl of fruit. There is other pieces of fruit. There's a banana, and the orange is orange. Okay, that might be an orange. I can pick it up. I feel it. Like I know what it feels like, and so I have that instead of having to borrow. The idea of borrowing knowledge is so like when you sit and think about it. Where are you borrowing it from? Where? How? When? Versus directly perceiving it. It's like I can pick up most things from this environment because I'm in it. I can see where my tea is. I can see where my food is. I can see where this is, where that is, because I'm directly perceiving it. It is like,
Proper
oh,
British
cool.
tea. I can see my
Tea.
tea.
I can see my tea. Indeed, my tea. And I know where to hold it so it's not hot. And I know when I'm thirsty. Like it is, there are triggers, if you will, that draw my just wanted to see his face. There, as I see it, I'm like, oh, cool. As I perceive it, I can react and act.
Well, we perceive for action. So
Yeah.
as as everyone in ecological psychology would probably just like say, is that we are not organisms in a void. Like we don't just perceive things, we don't just sense things. We're doing it for a reason, and that reason is for action, whatever that action may be.
I also think one of the big things about like the ecological approach is once you can get past the language and the
Just that easy thing.
once you can get if you strip all the language and try to describe it as practically as possible. I don't want to use the word simply because yeah, as practically as possible, it makes sense. It's like, and when Danny was explaining it to me, it just deep in my bones, it feels that it's just yes. Instead of whenever the cognitive approach was mentioned, I'm like, yeah, but what about this? Oh, it's this thing. Okay, but why? Why this thing? Why not that thing? And that was the thing for me that brought me up the much steeper but much steeper hill that actually made sense versus we
It
have
never
a sense
used to
of
be that way though.
Hmm?
It never used to be that way though. And that I think is what Scott's getting at. It just makes sense. Yeah, but why does it just make sense? Some of the coaches don't get that bit.
Well,
Well,
with regards to the terminology, I think you're right, right? I think it's important. It's important that we have clearly defined terms.
Yes.
But what are we also trying to do? Our endeavor is again to bridge that gap, and that's the struggle we've been having in our community. There's a couple of great coaches out there that I'm in my network, and they're using these technical terms. Now, when I first started using them, and I've spoken about this a lot, is that it feels kind of weird. It kind of feels like pretentious, and I'm just saying these big words for the sake of it because I learned about them 5 minutes ago in a book. And what did I do for a job? I coach people to hit each other, or whack each other in the head. You know what I mean? What business do I have using these words? But then if you don't use them, they just get kind of misinterpreted, or it just becomes a wish wash. But as you get to, for me at least, as I get to use these words and use them routinely and get a better understanding of them, they just become words. They're just, and so I think that's the challenge, Danny. And I think that's where you have a massive opportunity, is to find that balance between watering it down or simplifying and not dumbing it, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. When it comes to the loan of intelligence, something that I speak about, well, I don't speak about it, but I speak about it to myself in my audio journals when I'm talking to myself, uh, is the idea of robots, machine. That's the conversation that I see online quite a lot when I'm going through the Twitter threads or whatever's going on. They'll say, "Yeah, but we can program robots." But that's the point. You have a programmer
Programmer,
that
yeah.
gives the robot the knowledge. That's the loan of intelligence. The programmer gives the robot the information for the robot to do the thing. Who programmed us? Reference to Matrix. Who gave us the programming to start with? Which when I come back with that response, I either don't hear from them because whatever reason, or they just go, oh yeah, and they don't give me an answer. And that's where using the language of an ecological, like the ecological approach, there is an explanation. We would explain it using the words and terms that we have with the language of perceptions. Julie and Jeff talk about it in the book quite a bit about Euclidean geometry and Newtonian physics. They have words, terms, language to describe physics and maths, which is great. And it's great for them, but it doesn't explain perception. And when you're trying to use language that doesn't explain perception, you struggle to actually give an answer, which is what, to me, the ecological approach has given me. It's given me language, words to use that actually explain what I experience, not me trying to beat around the bush, use loads of complex words to explain what's going on, which in my coaching, I found way easier. When I was explaining what it is that was actually happening, I was, oh, I've added this constraint, or the affordance you perceived isn't what I wanted, so I will add in a constraint. Those to me sound natural, which to others don't necessarily.
Just the constraints and affordances, even if you're just using those, it's immediately like, because what I tried to do when I first started to explore this in the business in my work was not to use those words. And I found myself explaining or over explaining it to avoid any misconceptions versus just using the word constraint, using the word affordance, because both of them, although there is quite possibly still some misunderstanding there, we all know when you're constraining something, what that means. It
Within reason, yeah.
Yeah. And so starting with just that language for me was really helpful, like just there. And then it was slowly bringing in the other things. And so in what I do, half the time I don't explain the language. It's very much action orientated, which is kind of exactly what we do anyway. So
Yeah.
it's very much almost flipping it on its head and talking about the actions while us as the coach puts in the constraints and provides opportunities for perception.
For behavior.
That's it.
Opportunities for behavior.
Yeah.
John, you're too behind on the getting corrected tally, but here goes. So I think the word affordance is thrown around a lot, right? Especially in my community now, and it's great, and people are getting it and understanding. I think maybe I had a bit more of a superficial understanding up until recently. I just finished Rob Withagen's book on affective Gibson psychology, and Jeff kindly sent me over a transcript for his new book coming over. He was talking about lower order and higher order affordances. Is that something you've come across, Danny?
Yeah.
But added a lot more richness to it, and again, it starts to make more sense how our emotional affect in that changes how we perceive and how we perhaps misperceive, and that's really relevant to my sport in the sense that I can have. I'm talking about my fighters here. They could be, training in the gym and whatnot. But when they go into this, I'm cautious of using this word here, but or this phrase, when they go from this behavioral setting into the behavioral setting of competition, and I mean just the different constraints in competition, the anxiety, the weight cut, the weights, the scrutiny. They clearly, their perceptual action system is perturbed. Clearly, they're not perceiving and acting as well as they do in the practice environment. So reading that book on how emotions affect perception was really, really interesting. Have you anything to say about
that? Have I got anything to say? Yes. How much will I say? I think I can't remember the academic's name, but in one of the presentations of Turing, there was I can't remember who it was, but there was a person that did some research into behaviors of children, depending on the cultural and societal
Harry
environments.
Hip.
Yeah, that's it. And he talks about behavioral settings. And the way that I would look at behavioral settings is very similar to the way that I would try to explain behavior modes, like modes of behavior and reasoning behind behavior. Everyone, depending on the relationship they have with the environment, will change the way that they behave. And because behavior is coupled with perception, of course, they are therefore impacted. So even changing throughout time, because time is obviously constant, will change the way that we perceive as the conversation start. Well, when the conversation started, we would be perceiving one another slightly differently to the way we perceive it now. When you change lots of elements about a situation, i.e., the physical location as well as the other people in it, the relationship you have with the other people in it will drastically change the way that you're perceiving and acting and behaving within that environment. So, from my personal experience, when I was at a trampoline competition, what I realized, well, what I learned over time is that if I become familiar with my other competitors, I don't feel as threatened in competition because I don't see them as this conflict, this competitor. I see them as someone else I know, which is similar to the relationship I have with the people I had at training. So it felt more comfortable to me to compete against people that I was familiar with than people I didn't. I just saw compete and I was like, their routine looks way better than mine. I'm speaking trampoline here, but me finding a part of the relationship in training, like me in the training environment, and trying to match up as best I could, so reduce the complexity, reduce the differences in the competition environment, helped me feel more comfortable because I have expertise in those sorts of environments. I've developed skills in training because, see, that's where most of the training happens, at training, at practice. Whereas when you go to a competition, well, now that's a different skill. And we can talk about performance in sport competitions all day long because there are so many things going on there. But the closer either the closer the training is to the competition or the competition is to training, the more likely you are to be able to repeat repetition without repetition your performance because the behavioral setting is somewhat similar and you can feel the relationship is also somewhat similar. So there's less information to try and self-organize as an individual making behaviors. Hopefully that made sense.
No, makes sense. Would it be a stretch to say that we talk about perception action that it would almost be more apt to say perception behavior coupling?
Behavior is perception action. So it's perception action coupling, which essentially equals behavior. Think about it
Okay.
like perception plus action equals behavior. So for clarity, I try and say them all when I'm on a podcast, but when I'm actually talking, well, when I was coaching, I would just say your behavior. I wouldn't bother saying perception and action. I would just say your behavior is different. But then that also depends. That also changes on who it is that I'm speaking to. If I'm speaking to like the little ones that really don't understand any of this stuff, then behavior to them is going to mean something drastically different to the behavior of some of the athletes that I was like. They would ask me, "Oh, why are you saying this?" and the other coaches say that. So it wasn't unintentional, but I was teaching them about the ecological approach through the way that I was coaching, just by the words I was using, so they would understand why we're training in certain ways, rather than us going, okay, we're going to do a mock competition today. Why are we doing that? Because it's similar to the competition environment. The little ones hated it. I don't want to be in a competition. I don't want everyone looking at me. But the old ones, because they understood some of the language we were using, constraints, affordances, change in behaviors, they were like, okay, I don't like this, but I know I should probably do this. And that's how they became more accepting of mock competitions.
That's interesting. Another thing, again, I try not to say my sport is different because I think a lot of these principles transcend sport. It's just across sports, but my sport is different. You know, it is different from trampolining. You have someone trying to turn your lights off in front of your friends and your family. So I think what's in especially in mixed martial arts, boxing, kickboxing, and whatnot, that they think, well, the way, so they intuitively get it, right? We're going to try and make this practice representative, and we're going to, smash the shit out of each other in practice, and that's hopefully going to transfer. I'm starting to think that that's kind of, I don't think we can ever wholly recreate that behavioral setting. Like, I don't think we can get representative. Also, it's completely unsustainable and it's completely unethical. So my idea is to, just train, keep it very, very light and playful, and then try and get the the team who want to compete just competing more, getting more attuned to that behavioral set. So that seems pretty clear and obvious. But another thing is, again, in reading that book, that the way people maybe they bring, like if I'm training a fighter for a couple of years, they've got so much historical, socio-cultural baggage and emotions that goes way back. I'm just not sure how effective we can undo or change a lot of that within practice itself. And if this is making any sense, I'm always surprised that I could take a group of kids or kids, anyone under 40, right, to me, and we can do, some of them can perform wonderfully in training, some of them struggle and whatever, and you have this idea, you have this perception of them that when they go into that cage, you can see who's going to perform and who's not, and it's often completely the other way around, and that's fascinating to me. But I think that's been baked into the pie their whole lives and beyond.
There are a couple of things I want to say there. One of them is representative practice. Is like every experience is unique. You cannot replicate any other experience because everything is obviously uniquely structured. That's the way we directly perceive. So experience is always unique. You could never recreate it. But representative practice tries to represent as many of the elements as possible. Obviously, in training for trampoline, I'm not going to try and do a triff or quad triff straight out in training, because that's not what I would do at a competition. And I would imagine, like you were saying, you're not going to try and like all out fight someone because there's risks to that. So you would try and represent the environment as best as possible with whatever variables. Sometimes that representation could be very, very, very different from what's actually happening. So when people argue about the passing ball against the wall in football is a bad drill, well, actually it's not, because it does represent elements of that skill. So it completely depends what the purpose of the training was for, which is where representative practice needs to be somewhat mediated. Representation doesn't have to be as close to the thing as possible. It can be very, very different, which is why you start looking at the constraints-led approach and adding deliberate constraints in to make it less representative. So I think it depends on the direction or the purpose of the training. Like, what's the point of the practice? What do you want the individuals to get out of it? When it comes to designing things anyway. John, is there anything you wanted to add there?
It kind of reminds me of when, as a musician, which I suppose is a sport in its own way, with a lot of what you actually have to do, with training it's like the scale work, which is not very representative of playing. However, it's not about that. When you're playing guitar, you're figuring out the positions of your fingers and ensuring that you get that, I suppose, fluidity, but it's never the same. And then one thing that I did in the past was have just spend and constrain it very small. It was like you were just saying about having it so constrained. It's like, okay, I'm just going to play these, couple of notes, but really pay attention to X, Y, and Z, or just X sometimes. It's like, where is my finger landing? How clear of the tone am I going to be able to bring out? And so being able to have that constraint, and then as it kind of comes back out into the performance sense, then it's a very different atmosphere, but you almost have that.
Don't say automatic.
No, because it's not automatic, but you have those skills there as part of it, so that when you interact in a different environment, you have a focus thing where you're like, oh yeah, I remember this. And I remember this, and I remember this, and I remember, the positions of my fingers where I got that really clear tone, and it's super focused, so that when you're in a different environment, those skills still are there.
The reason I said don't see automatic is because I think that's the traditional approach. You would say, oh, you've trained it so much.
I am translating the traditional approach, because when I was taught how to do this, all I was hearing was the traditional approach. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not quite right. No, muscle memory. And I'm hearing all of the traditional, and I'm like, translate on the fly. Like, what is that?
Interpret on the fly.
And it's like, yeah, so that's what I was doing. I just tried to interpret what was taught to me from a cognitive approach.
I think you're 4 down on being corrected now, John. But maybe
Danny's
just being polite.
I think I'm probably like more like 20. Danny's just being kind.
So I have something to say about. So I've also noticed there's nothing more fun than watching all the eggheads squabble on Twitter. By the way, Danny, but I've noticed that. So I've been guilty of this
X.
too, right? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, X. There we
Yeah.
go. There's one. 4-1, John. I've been very guilty of this, right? That we can tend to scoff at or dismiss a lot of the drills that we see in our sports. Two things to say on that. So I agree. So and I've been guilty of this. I've said that this has no value, and I think that's incorrect, right? I think everything can have value. However, I think what happens in martial arts as well is we completely isolate the training. So I've been thinking, fighter A or combatant A is a complex system, complex dynamic system. Fighter B is a complex dynamic system. In the fight, that is a whole new integrated complex dynamic system. And I try my best never, ever to violate that. Okay. At least when they're kicking a ball against the wall, they are interacting with the ball. But I think what tends to happen in our sport, we're not interacting with the actual thing we're meant to interact with. So shadow kicking something against the ball or running around a tennis court without a ball and a bat, that would seem absurd. So I think there's when we talk about way some sports are drilled and some other, there's a degree of representative along that scale. And I think in martial arts we tend to really violate that principle of separating the system. Do you have anything to say about that?
I would. I feel like I'm correcting people. If you think I'm saying something wrong, just call me out.
No,
But
I'm here to be corrected.
you said that it was incorrect to say there's no value. I don't think it's incorrect because there could be no value. I think it's inaccurate. That's the way I would rephrase that, because depending on why the person posted, if the person posted the thing thinking that it was very representative, well, then there's no value. But if the person interpreted the thing as it's delivering value because it's directed at whatever goal, whatever outcome they wanted to get to, well, then there is value. And this is where it comes back to the intention of the coach and the intention of the post on social media, because some people post on social media to get likes and views and clicks and all that stuff, which, okay, great, whatever vanity metrics you want to find. But if the purpose of the post is to help other people to do that exercise, for me it would help to understand why they're doing the exercise in the first place. When it comes to shadow boxing, I start thinking about other sports that do similar training drills or training practices. When you've got like golf, you practice golf without a ball. Is that representative? Well, arguably no, but also arguably yes, depending on the focus. If you're doing shadow boxing for an hour, I very, 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 very rarely will like say that's useful, because there is very limited competition and you're not really perceiving and acting to something that is representative. However, if the direction of the practice was to help the individual understand the way their body moves, well, now you have a purpose there. Will it take them an hour to understand that? I don't think so, but I don't know. So I would look at each individual case, because obviously everyone's individual, each individual case, and look at the purpose of the training for that individual in the environment that you're looking to train them in. But yeah, a lot of the shadow boxing stuff I'm not a fan of, but I don't understand the expertise of the skills and biomechanics of the movements or the event itself to really say one way or the other.
So I think there's two things. There's two things that perpetuate this. Is one is, well, so such and such do that, and they're a champion. Okay, so there's like that appeal to tradition or authority, whatever. Might need corrected there. And the other one is, I think the red herring is this fundamental understanding between near and far transfer. And of course, you're going to get good at the drill you're doing. And I think that tends for coaches to say, hey, look, we're getting results here. Yeah. I have no problem. I say to my students all the time, go home and, in your bedroom, get in your underpants and shadow box all night. It won't do you any harm. But when I've got a group of individuals together, we are going to get as much as we can on that side of the representative scale as we can possibly get.
I don't know whether it would do no harm. That's where I start questioning what they're doing, like the purpose of what they're doing. Because if they're doing something inaccurately multiple times, then they're learning that movement, and it won't become autonomous, but it will become where they attract their movements to. Talking about movement attractors. So if they are shadow boxing in certain ways, then they will feel more comfortable doing something that they've done multiple times because they've done it multiple times, and it becomes an action capability they are more likely to choose because it's attracted. So it could cause harm if that is negatively impacting their performance in the sport if they want to become a performance athlete. So there is a level of harm that could be attributed to the shadow boxing with no direction, no constraint, just do what you want. Having said that, though, there is an element of play that individuals have to be able to play with their body in the environments to explore what they can, can't, should, shouldn't do. Finding that balance, there isn't a line. There's no solid line there. It's very, very blurry. So finding that balance between deliberate practice, deliberate play, and then free play within experience is obviously important for the coach. So how you manage that, I think, is an ongoing conversation. It's not something you can prescribe. It's something that you'd have to manage throughout whenever you see them, if you see them. And when it comes to the looking at elite athletes defined by their performance level, the expertise that they've gained obviously suits them. It doesn't necessarily suit anyone else. And I would probably say it doesn't suit anyone else because when you look at some of the best athletes in the world, take some of the left-handed athletes in the world, the right-handed athletes aren't going to do the same thing because they're right-handed, not left-handed.
Yep.
So that's one obvious example, but some of the other examples from pick a sport, pick an elite athlete, you look at them and they will all do things slightly differently. And it depends on the strength and weakness of the organism capabilities and the environment situations that works for them. So you could create, and this is something my head of course used to say, you can create an elite program for a novice athlete, but you can't necessarily use an elite program for a novice athlete, which is something I hold true, but I don't know how accurate that is. But that would be in your sport. I would imagine it's the same, but again, I don't want to assume.
Yeah, and I've been pulling you into the striking sports a lot today, and actually, I don't believe anyone's really talking about the ecological approach in striking presently, but there's a lot in the grappling and jiu-jitsu. But with your point, actually, it's interesting, and since I came across the ecological approach, it makes so much sense. But you talked about left-handers and right-handers. I think there's a disproportionate amount of success from left-handers in striking sports, and it's completely clear why, because they're generally calibrating against righties. Righties are generally calibrating against other righties. So this throws them into disarray when they come to compete. So the advantage here is clear. And in my gym, again, to the striker, I have them explore all different kinds of stances and moves and positions and whatnot. And I think if what I'm seeing, so I have a follow-on question to this, but what I'm seeing in my gym is there's enough variability in the room because we haven't tried to, be this kind of cookie cutter milling process that everyone's bringing. There's already a variability within the group, but everyone has different styles and whatnot, and they're each. So for me, it's purely ecological. Everyone's giving each other little problems, and they're needing new solutions. And this is what we say all the time: new partner, new problem, need a new solution. And this constantly kind of, it's just this model that gains steam. This kind of flywheel effect of learning. I said there was two things to think about there. No, I think I lost my train of thought.
That's an example right there of repetition without repetition. That right there, like what you've got is you've set up repetition without repetition because you're practicing all the moves, but it's a completely different person. So you're repeating what you've learned, but also having to adapt on the fly. So you kind of have that beautiful repetition without repetition, and it's just
Bernstein.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I agree.
I remember what I was thinking about because again, one of the most common pushbacks is, well, we need to, and Rob Gray talks a lot about this too, is, well, we need to get the fundamentals down. I'm not even quite sure what fundamentals mean. That's a slippery word to me, but we need to get the fundamentals down first, and then this ecological stuff, then we can do some of that. Do you have something to say about that? Because I have very strong feelings on that. My novice practices are really fucking ugly, but I've learned to trust it over time that the qualities that I'm looking for will appear. Now, I'm not even saying they'll appear more quickly. I'm not even suggesting they'll be as aesthetically pleasing as maybe people have come through that traditional approach. But what I know over time is that skill trumps technique.
Yes.
It also is going back to what Danny was saying about like what the coach is actually doing, like what the coach's plan is with the social media posting. And for you, it's like just letting it happen, letting it emerge, basically, is having it appear over time instead of it being a coach just wants to prove that they are a coach versus allowing the coachee to find what they need to find, and then adding constraints in that environment and attuning to those, and all of that lovely stuff that we talk about. That's just
If I've given the impression that I don't have a huge ego as a coach, you're mistaken. But it's challenged every day. You know, it's challenged every day on the mats, and people come into they have this perception of what they're going to learn, and this Mr. Miyagi wax on, wax off shite, and I'm going to tell them exactly what to do with their hands and their body and that, and I don't do any of that. And over time, it's starting there, you know, because the end products are starting to come online now, and my young team are having a lot of success. That, oh, okay, well, maybe this old Scottish got something right. There's some method to the madness here.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the gratification, short and long-term gratification. When coaches discuss fundamentals and getting the fundamentals right, and so great, if the goal is to get them to do that specific movement, then go and teach fundamentals. If the goal is to teach them to be adjustable in the environment that they're likely to play the sport in, now you need to teach them how to develop the skill with variation. The way I would look at most of the fundamentals that are taught is, great, you've taught the fundamentals, but now you need to reteach those fundamentals in every single situation they could be exposed to. Why do that? Why not just help them develop the movement in the variations as they learn? Instead of taking 1 week to learn how to move forwards, spend a month learning how to move forwards against 3 different people, 5 different people. Then they can adjust those movements, which makes the learning later on far quicker because they've learned to adjust rather than just adapt to one movement. And with your group, what sounds like anyway a very diverse group, or the individuals are learning to adjust, learning to adapt their movements to each individual. So when they come up with someone that is that variation of fighter, it's not completely new to them. They can already work out what's going on. Whereas someone that's only trained against right-handed fighter A will only be able to fight against right-handed fighter A. When it comes to someone else, they're like, okay, now what? Then they have to adjust on the fly. But if they've never done that before, they're going to struggle. And that, again, is where long-term gratification, short-term gratification of developing skills changes. And when we look at the Olympic athletes, which I think is a good example here, a lot of Olympic athletes don't they pick up the long-term development program. They're not specialized early. They don't specialize their sports early. They have 3, 4 main sports when they're younger, or they do this sport in the summer, that sport in the winter, and it's the variation of training, variation of practice that gets them there. Most performers that succeed at youth level don't succeed at adult level. But most performers that succeed at adult level don't succeed in the early level, because early specialization, long-term athlete development, and those can map very well with the ecological approach. Because in the ecological approach, you don't want to teach them, well, you wouldn't want to teach them, this is how you do this thing because it will get you there. Great, you've won the under 15s. But when you've got to fight against the guy that's bigger than you now what do you do? To use a football example, which is I used to see this all the time coaching football, like actual football, not American football. Is you'd get the big guy, whoever they were, they'd either play centre back because they could head the ball, or they'd play up front, kick the ball to the big guy, and he'd go score. Great, he was amazing all the way through to youth football. Gets to adult football, everyone's the same height as him. He can't push people off the ball. Now he's useless because they haven't learned any other skill. Same thing with rugby. You get the big prop in rugby. He's a huge kid, barges everyone over. Suddenly everyone's the same size as him. He can't barge people over, but he can't run or change direction or pass because he's never had to before. In fighting, I imagine it's the same thing. You get so used to relying on one strength that when it's no longer a strength, you haven't learned to do anything else. Yeah. bit of a rant towards the end of that.
Johnny,
Yeah, I was just thinking about your comment about the Mr. Miyagi bullshit, which I loved. And then I was just like going, but so what was he doing? Because if we assume, now I don't know nothing about martial arts at all, so you can absolutely add some more corrections to my check mark for this.
Other people hit others. There you go. There you go.
yeah.
Yay! I knew that.
Don't overthink it, John.
One person
And
hits other person.
they punch things. But if you think from the coach's perspective, Miyagi's perspective, he was trying to do one thing, and that was teach respect, which is what he was kind of doing at the same time from someone who knows very little. And just from my watching of the show, it was about respect and it was about that kind of thing, which means it's perfect. But then obviously getting into the ring, you're stuffed because that's all you've kind of learned.
Yeah, let's see how that respect helps you when someone's trying to kick you in the face.
Exactly. And in fact, that was, I think, shown there because when he was kicked, had the absolute shit beaten out of him. So
oops. That's one of the frustrating parts about popular media, popular culture, and when it comes to learning, teaching, coaching, educating, anything, is they show the thing that looks fancy, that looks flash, that looks whatever, cool, but that's not how the world works. Obviously, Karate Kid and all those iterations very similar. I would imagine you look at it and go, that's not how training really works. But what training really looks like is messy, chaotic, and it doesn't look nice. It doesn't look fun. There's lots of mistakes, people tripping over their feet, I would imagine. And there's a I think it's called Sticks. It's where a drum teacher drills a boy to play drums, and his hands end up bleeding. And it's basically a drill sergeant, but teaching this drummer. And the music industry, there was a big uproar in the way like music teachers saw this because, sorry,
was it Whiplash?
that's the one.
Whiplash, yeah, it was
Whiplash, yeah.
I remember that drummer film. Yeah,
Yeah, brilliant. Love that movie.
Like, it's a great film, but when I was looking at the conversations about teachers, the music teachers were saying, no, like if this did happen, I haven't seen this happen in years. This is more of a sports training put into music. What are you shaking your head for?
It does happen.
Come on, John, get your correction back.
Go on, say it.
Yeah,
I'm speaking from the conversation.
I was like, from a music perspective, it's drilling it in. It's forcing people to just practice this one thing. When I was doing music, that's often, and you were talking about the messy practice. It's like, yes, but in the music, depending on the teacher you get, if you get a teacher that understands how to teach and to coach, probably, which most of them don't.
Everyone does it with variation.
Not in the music industry, I regret to say. Not as much as I would hope, but often it's about drilling for the qualification or for the not really practical in real life usage, which if that is what you wish to do, absolutely. But it is always drills. It always just do these things, just learn these scales versus the actual holistic approach, which is the relationship between the instrument and the organism and the environment and all of that stuff. And it is very much.
I do want to say that drills aren't bad.
No. Drills are bad.
Just to clarify for anyone listening, drills aren't bad.
No, they're not bad. No. But it's also the assumption that practice has to be, you hear the phrase, which I'm sure both of you hate as much as I do, practice makes perfect. And it's like you have to practice to perfection, which is the assumption in the music, like music teachers like keep practicing till you can do these scales perfectly. And even back along before I was even in this approach and understood anything about it, I was like, but yeah, great, I can do my my C major scale on a guitar in a matter of seconds at 300 BPM. And how am I going to put that into anything?
Yep.
How?
I agree. I think when it comes to the practicing and the drills, yes, like they are useful, but as we mentioned earlier, if there's a purpose for them, like why are you actually doing them? I don't know whether it would be, I don't know whether it's accurate to say that drills are useful or not useful, because obviously it comes down to, like I say, what you're trying to get from it. But when people give drills, normally from my experience, it's because they can't control the behavior of the individual in the lessons, rather than this is the philosophy of education that I want to follow. But that's just from my experience.
I think the word drill, though, is open to interpretation. I have a fairly strict interpretation of my own. What would yours be, Danny and John, of a drill?
Go on, John, you go first.
He's buying time, John.
Cool, thanks. Yeah,
Well,
I think
I answer everything first most of the time.
that's right. I think a drill in this example is a repeated action that is repeated over and over again. It's isolated and repeated. You repeat this drill, you repeat these 4 notes on a guitar, 4 notes on a piano. It is very hyper constrained. It's really constrained. It is constrained to the point where there is no as limited variation as possible. Which is obviously the assumption is there's no variation, but as we know, I don't think that's really possible, especially in music. That's actually when playing the guitar, it's impossible to have no variation. So that's how I would define a drill.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. A highly constrained environment that typically relies on following instructions, and whatever the perfect, the end, the target goal is. That's the way I would see as a drill. And like I say, it's not a bad thing, because sometimes that's what you want to do as a worked example for someone to experience an affordance. But done too much can have harm. However you want to.
That was one of the things in music that I had to stop doing for myself, for my own personal development. It was, okay, just spend, an hour practicing these scales or practicing these 3 notes, and the thing that kind of helped me, now I know this is still using the cognitive approach that was taught to me, so I'm translating in my head.
Traditional approaches, because cognitive ecological psychology is still cognitive.
See, there you go. The traditional approach is it was working on a little section of a piece of music and then moving on to the next half bar and doing that little bit. And these were all drills, but they were almost micro drills, because I was doing those and then I was moving on to the next piece. But actually, this bit before was getting better. So that's also an example of an even smaller drill.
I think drills are led by the assumption there is a perfect, there is a right, which obviously there isn't a right, there isn't a perfect. There is a perfect for that situation at that time and place, but that will never happen again. So like I say, I think it depends on the intention of the session from the educator. But then I'm sort of questioning myself there, because it could also be the individual themselves. Because if the individual sees the intention as, oh, I need to make this perfect, then that also could be negative. So in a game, they could perceive, or they could interpret the game as meaning we need to do this thing now, which means the learner has a perfect frame in mind, which could then lead to like individual critique, like, oh, I didn't hit what I think the coach wants me to do, which gets into the interactions and clarity of communication between the educator and the individual. Again, that's just me thinking out loud.
So I've got a few things to say on drills, and I think, first of all, Danny, I think you're right. I think I can tend to be a bit dismissive, and I'll try and explain why I'm dismissive. And I think as a community that's found this ecological approach, we can say drills are useless, and that's probably unfair and untrue. So for me, I agree with your kind of definition that drill is a prescribed, rehearsed, rote repetition of an ideal movement, right? And to say there's absolutely no value in that, what I think it's very useful for is it guides and educates the intention and attention to certain aspects of that movement, right? That you could argue that when you come to a more live scenario, that this would be able to facilitate faster learning, or so to speak. However, the big thing in martial arts, I think, again, we were talking about violating this principle of taking the two systems apart. Now, so in drills, maybe in striking, it would be against a heavy bag or whatever. Now, again, the heavy bags have a value for a different reason for me. But let's go back to the grappling and jiu-jitsu. So typically, when we talk about a drill in jiu-jitsu, someone would be an oogie. They're just kind of this passive kind of, Gumby. You're just moving around their body. So one of my biggest issues with drilling is the opportunity cost of the person who's not really engaged. So they're doing this repetition, movement over movement over movement. There's a lot of details there. So there's a lot of you can maybe, again, I'm careful when I use this word. this kind of cognitive burden. But I do think maybe you can describe it better as like this internal focus of attention when people are thinking what they're doing with their body and whatnot. So I have a pretty strict definition of drills, and I think I'm allowed to do that because you can define it however way you want. So the problem when I give too much, or I concede too much value to drills, is then we end up in this space where, okay, we can have this hybrid model to learning. We can do all our isolated stuff that's prescriptive and traditional, and then we can also have a bit of the ecological stuff. And I think that's generally what's happening. And that seems super reasonable, right? It seems super reasonable that we can divide practice between elements of traditional approaching, the traditional approach with the underpinning assumptions of muscle memory and that which I want to go into, or and we can do the live ecological explorative stuff, the direct learning stuff. And I think that's a little bit dangerous while we're trying to shift people into this ecological space. That if you give people the kind of the rationale for having a hybrid model, I don't think that really helps kick the ball up the field, so to speak.
I think there's a difference between the practices you give and the philosophies that you follow, because you can do a traditional practice and follow the ecological approach. Like you can have an ecological reasoning behind the traditional practices you're giving. So when you say split it, I'm curious what you mean by split traditional and ecological practices.
Okay, so what I mean by that again is generally if we were to caricature it, and often it's a caricature, right, of a traditional that we're going to isolate all the different components of a movement down and train them in isolation and put them back together. Would that characterize perhaps what we're talking about in some of the most traditional approaches? Now, I don't think ecological approach or a traditional approach tells you how to run a practice. I think it's just a lens how you see practice activities through.
Yeah.
I would see that as a constrained practice.
I think drills are just hyper
if I was
constrained to
using
use your thing.
Yeah, it would be it would still be ecological. It would
It's
still
always
be
it's either ecological or it's not, right?
Yeah.
yeah, because it's just a hyper constrained practice. That's what a drill is, a hyper constrained practice.
Yeah, sorry, John. I'm sorry to interrupt you while I interrupt you. I think exactly that's what you were kind of looking at me a little queer there for, Danny, is that there is no ecological practice or traditional practice. We either it's a worldview. We see everything, everything through an ecological lens, and that is something that we're definitely. And again, I hands up, I'm guilty of it too. That we tend to do that. Oh, that practice is so IP, or that practice is so ecological. I'm saying no. It's the lens that we look through, and I could have the most strict drill on turning your thumb this way and your elbow that way. Still look at that through an ecological lens. So I agree with that, but for just to generalize, there's characteristics of more traditional approaches and there's characteristics of this more kind of ecological approach. And I think that a lot of coaches coming in the space think they can marry the two together.
I can understand. I think I understand where they're coming from, but you could also say the same, like the other way around, because there are traditional practice sessions that you would ascribe to be more ecological, such as whole game whole. You practice with the game, then you isolate it, and then you go back to the game. That's more ecological. The reason that I would say that like the differences between the approaches and the actual practice is what you then do from it. If you do an isolated drill and you're justifying that practice session through an IP lens, well, now you're saying this is the perfect movement. So when it goes into the actual like event, the game itself, you're now looking for that perfect movement. And if they don't hit the perfect movement, well, now they've done it wrong. That is the assumption, the approach that people may take using those practices moving forwards through an ecological lens. Instead of it being, okay, we're going to do this isolated drill, I want you to do that in practice. If they don't do that and do something else, but it was more effective, well, that's actually what we want to see. So there wasn't a wrong movement.
I think it would be clearer to say then that they're mixing assumptions, and I don't think you should mix assumptions. And I think practices generally, coaches have intuitively got it. There's never been a purely, we're just going to do this rote repetition and expect it to turn up in performance. It's always been a kind of hybrid model. I think what the ecological approach says is it helps you identify where the learning is likely coming from in any kind of practice model, and it allows you to parse out what's probably more useful and what's less useful. Would you agree with that?
I think taking the ecological approach allows you to explain why and how they're learning. So yes, you can then adjust the session to try and direct people towards attractors. So you can add constraints or remove constraints to change that relationship, which helps them develop lots of skills, not so many skills. So you'd be able to differentiate a session easier through an ecological approach rather than saying, this is the best movement. We're going to get 10 people to punch a bag like this. That would be a practice driven by an IP approach, because an ecological approach would say, well, actually, this person's like half the height of that person. They probably don't need to be punching all the way up there. They need to be punching down here. Now, to us, that makes sense. Like, why would you get them hitting the same spot? That just doesn't, not logical. But that's where the coaches, I think, are being ecologically valid, because they see that, well, it's pointless to have them all going up there. So they're ecologically valid in the way that they're practicing some things. But they're unconsciously doing that, to use the conscious term. They're unconsciously being ecologically valid in some places, but not in others. And exposing people to the approach will make them aware of the areas where they're not actually being as valid as they could be.
Yeah, so let me just maybe add a little bit more clarity. I think so. As ecological, talking about representation, repetition without repetition. Here's my buzzwords, my train of buzzwords now. Self-organization, decision making, exploration, this kind of stuff, and that's what we underpin. That's what we're trying to get, is cram as much into a session as we can. I think most coaches would say, well, we already do that. There's a big element of our practice that does that, but we also do this other stuff. And then that's coming back, that's kind of inferring this kind of this muscle memory, this rote repetition, that we can learn these idealized movements and plug them back into the game. So I think that's probably the reason I push back on drills, so to speak, because I'm trying to move further and further away from that and advocate for repetition without repetition, for self-organization, for there is no one ideal technique, that perception and action are tightly coupled.
I think because the ecological approach and the IP approaches, like, because they are philosophy and they are approaches, you can't look at a session and know whether it's ecological or traditional. You can't know. You have to
kind of it's almost above it all as such, if you want to say it like that.
It's a lens, right?
Yeah.
It's a lens and can only ever be a lens, and the lens is often how the coach views it.
Well, if we take glasses, like the left glass is the IP, the right glass is the ED. The actual thing they're seeing, we don't know which glass they're looking through unless we ask them. And that's the way that I approach coaches. When I'm looking at a session, I try and look through both lenses. Like, okay, why would they do this from an IP? Why would they do this from an ED? If it doesn't really make sense from an ED, it's highly constrained, then I would ask the coach, okay, I'm assuming that it's highly constrained because you want them to develop this, this, and this. If not, why are we doing this? And if they come up and say, oh, well, they need to develop this fundamental movement skill I now know they're coming from an IP approach and there is a perfect movement.
That technique, Danny, right? Fundamental skill or fundamental technique? Did I get my first correction? No? They're used interchangeably. That's my kind of. I get a little bit triggered when they are
used interchangeably, because when I see technique, the meaning that comes to me is biomechanical movement positions, which there are efficient biomechanical movement positions for each movement in each context, etc., etc. So there is an efficient technique, an optimal technique. Foundation to me is just where you start, and there will be an efficient starting technique, and there will be a foundational skill. So I think skill and technique are interchangeable depending on the context you're speaking them in, but they could both be accurate depending on what it is you're talking about. I lean towards skill because skills are more encompassing than techniques, but I don't think it really matters either way. Do you disagree?
No, I don't disagree. I'm careful when I throw these words around, technique and skill. I think techniques in and of themselves don't really interest me that much. I'll grant that there's better and worse ways to do things, but it's very highly context specific. And this is kind of the narrative we're trying to push. I'm trying to overshoot and be almost like an absolutist in some sense, because I'm trying to support coaches that are peeking over the fence here. And so I tend to maybe be a bit zealous about a lot of the assumptions.
So one of the things that I also agree, because the ecological approach is better, more better, or that's what I got from what you were saying. It's like trying to bring that in, but also that also, and I think you've said this to me before, Danny, it kind of counteracts the point of the ecological approach by saying one is better than the other, because there's not really better. What do you mean when you say it's better, or like
We
that's
use
the question.
effective.
Yeah, because effective, because yeah, effective or non-effective, it's the language which is a hard one to figure out.
I
Which
guess
there
the
isn't a right
question,
or wrong.
I guess the question John's trying to get at is obviously you're getting people to peek over the fence, or people are peeking over the fence, and you want to sort of bring them over.
Mhm.
And it's not that we think that the ecological approach is better. We think it's more efficient,
Ecologically valid.
useful. Yeah, I would say ecologically valid, but it's like how do you then again, this is not me asking you, this is just me asking in general. How do we get people incentivized to follow an approach that isn't, we wouldn't say it is better, because it's not necessarily better, because we don't know, because we're building our philosophy off of assumptions. But why would people come over here? I think is the question a lot of people would ask, like, why am I going to go over there? Why am I bothering to learn all these new words and terms, etc., etc.? And the answers that I would give to that, from my experience in sports research anyway, is typically when people take an ecological approach, there are less injuries, they engage in sport longer, they are more likely to get to high performance levels later on in life, they are less likely to drop out, and those are participation metrics, not performance metrics.
Sure.
But then that comes back to what sort of coach are you? Do you want them to be a performance, like a gold medalist at 13 years old, or do you want them to be a lifelong athlete, however you define that, active in life moving forwards? And depending on the goal of the individual educator will change potentially the approach they take. So why I would want people to move more ecological, because I think it's more fair and it's more equitable in the way that you coach, and it helps individuals develop lasting skills rather than acute skills that are very difficult to transfer. But that's my idealistic view anyway.
Well, I think we can safely say that, you know, people are drawn to sport, especially fighting, right? People are drawn to this sport of kickboxing and whatnot. They have no aspirations to ever get clubbed in the head or compete or whatever. But there's some kind of thing that's pulling them into that. So that engagement part and everything is enormous for me. In fact, that's the biggest part of me. I want people. We come in, we crank the music, we play, we have fun, and we do it in a relatively safe environment, right? I use the word relatively because there's always associated risks. I think every single person who picks up some kind of endeavor, a sport or hobby, they want to be better. I think that's something that is across everything. Now, some want to be better than others. Some want to be better quicker. Some are more doing it for a social aspect in that. So yes, I think the one downside of perhaps the way we deliver for newer people is that they're a little confused because their expectations of what they're going to learn doesn't always quite match what they get when they step into our gym. But I think over time they start to get it, and there is a lot of engagement and fun. And then it's difficult to see for them. Well, and again, this is I'm very careful here because I think teaching and learning are often conflated, and I don't see them as the same thing.
Interesting. John's catching flies.
A talking out loud moment of like
Thinking out loud, because obviously you're talking out loud. That's what talking is.
Shush. Thank you. When you were talking about like them coming in and their expectations of what they were expecting from what they would do with you, is there not a space for constraining to meet their expectations?
There should be, but again, I'm a little bit, again, this is, I wholly admit it, I'm a little bit overzealous and I don't want to kind of muddy the message. And I'm prepared for that extra bit of maybe not meeting their full expectations and saying, hey, this is a different way. If you want, if it doesn't match your expectations, I totally respect that, and you can, maybe this isn't the place for you, but this is somewhat of a grand experiment we're trying. And I do want it to stay as, again, a lens, but as ecologically pure as we can, because I'm interested to. That's why I don't do too much of the rote drilling and whatnot, which I'm comfortable saying now. I used to push back and say that there's no real value here, but I can say yes, there is value, but I just don't want to mix the message up here. So maybe I'm overshooting right now, if that makes sense. But again, it's important for me because I think we're one of the few gyms that really embrace this approach. And if you were to scrutinize our practices, you would say, well, that's not particularly ecological valid. I get it. Okay, it's not 100%, but that is my ultimate endeavor.
The way I would say that when it comes to the value is you want to deliver a different type of value. You don't want to deliver the next 10-year-old belt doing whatever. You want to get people engaged, enjoying, and having fun in the activity. So it's a different type of value that you're delivering. When it comes to matching expectations, I think that's I mean, this is kind of going against like all marketing advice, but I don't think that's good to try and match your messaging to the expectation, because then if you're delivering something that doesn't match their expectation, like you're marketing to the wrong people. Like,
Sure, I grant that, and it's not for everyone, and
yeah,
some people might be put off, and maybe
but I would embrace that.
well, why I'm embracing it,
Yeah.
and that's why, again, that's where maybe my zealousness comes from. Now, you kind of raised your eyes a little bit when I said this conflation between teaching and learning, so you were thinking out loud. Speak freely, my boy.
Yeah, I don't hide my facial expressions very well. When I hear teaching and learning, I see processes, and I don't see much difference between the processes apart from the educator that delivers them. So when people say they are teaching, the way I look at that is there is a qualified teacher that is helping a learner be educated. When I see learning, I see the process as the same. It's still, there is a practice that's going on, there are experiences that's happening, and you have an educator guiding an experience for a learner. So I see the processes of teaching and learning very, very similar, but the way we use those words is what adds the meaning to whatever it is. Like if I am teaching you, then it's like directed, it's I am teaching that person. Whereas if I am learning from you, well, now I'm receiving something, or it's the same process. It's just whatever direction's happening. So I see them as the same thing, just used differently. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I downloaded it from, there's a MIT open courseware on dynamic systems, and there's a professor, I forget his last name, is Professor John such and such. And he opens the class by saying, I can't teach you anything. And everyone's giggling. He says, I know that sounds funny. He says, but I can't teach you anything. All we can do is provide the opportunities for you to learn. You have to do the work, you have to feel it, you have to play it. And that's where I think I'm making that differentiation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where I agree. And that, but again, that's really specific. Teach is a noun. It's a I give you something.
Right.
So that's one of the difficulties in the language when it comes to just educational science as a whole, because obviously Andrew Wilson talks about verbing your nouns. For those unfamiliar, the idea is that we don't have a memory, we remember. We don't perceive, we are perceiving organisms. So, and I think the book is cognizing rather than cognition, which is basically just thinking. Cognizing is thinking, but the idea of verbing your nouns, again, it comes back to like processes or things. And when people describe things as I have learned, okay, you've learned, and then the next question is you've learned what? And you have to quantify in some way what you've learned. How do you do that? I don't really know. So
Can you flesh out the notion then of knowledge about and knowledge of, or is that something you do you use that concept of the different types of knowledge? Can you explain a little bit about that? And then I don't know how long I've got you for, but I think the real sticky issue here is that of memory. And I know you just did an episode last week about it. I do want to talk a little bit about that today because I think that's a real sticking point for the community. But before we do that, Danny, can you explain a little bit about, because I think this may be the teaching side and the learning side can kind of parallel with knowledge of and knowledge about.
As we mentioned to start with, all of this comes from empiricism, like learning from experiences, and the learning process results in some conceptualization of knowledge. If you want to look at what knowledge means, go into the epistemology research and have at it. But knowledge of and knowledge about inside of the ecological approach is I can have knowledge of something, I can know the steps to do it, but it's not necessarily knowledge about, so the actual physical actions of doing that thing. So I can read instructions on how to fight someone, like move arm like this, move, and I can know of that fight. But when it comes to me doing it,
Sorry, Dan, do I have that flipped upside down then? I thought knowledge of was that like that. You knew. I thought the knowledge about it was actual the practical doing side. Have I got that flipped upside down?
I could have it the wrong way around, to be honest. The way that I try to remember them is knowledge of the thing, whereas knowledge about is doing the thing, but I might have it the wrong way around. I would have to go and check.
I've most likely got it the wrong way around, but I will recheck on that. Now you mentioned Andrew Wilson, so let's get onto that subject. And actually, I had a bit of an egg on my face when I spoke with Wagman and Blau said to me during our podcast that she wholly endorses the idea of muscle memory, right? And I've been shitting on muscle memory for months before that, because I think the way people talk about muscle memory, that's kind of what I'm shitting on. But then she went on to say, well, it absolutely needs to be done it's a context specific. But let's John, I want to hear your thoughts on this too. Muscle memory. Take it away.
Oh, muscle memory.
Silence.
I know.
Take it away, Danny.
I think muscle memory is quite fascinating because if we look at it from a traditional approach, our body doesn't have memories because all of it is here in this fleshy sack thing that's in our head. But I actually really loved Juliet because she said it on our episode as well, around that our body has memories. And when I am playing chords, I'm not thinking, okay, this finger's going to go here, this finger's going to go here, this finger's going to go here. I just play D, which is what I was doing. Now, is that this? Is that this? Or is it not? What actually is it? And it's context specific. And I think for me, where I'm at in my thinking is our body does have memory because it's part of the environment we're in. Is it in a specific place? I don't know. I don't know is the answer. But my lived experience is when I want to play a D, I'll play a D. When I want to play a G, I'll play a G. When I want to play, an F, I'll play an F. And I've just frozen, which means I look really great. There we go. So I think, yes, our body has the ability to remember.
You changed it right at the
I
end.
have, yes, as I was going. I love this. It has the ability to remember. It doesn't store a memory. It has the capacity for remembering. That's what I want to say. That's better. Capacity for remembering, which is why I do this out loud. It's so fun to do it out loud. The capacity for remembering, yes. Does it have memory stores? No, I do. I reject that notion quite strongly. I can't just come up over my head and stick in an M.2 slot, stick a new bit of RAM in or anything. No, and I can't do that for the rest of my body. But it has the potential for remembering.
Well, adding the ing is very helpful, right?
Yeah, that for me is one of the big things. It's like memory is going back to the verb and nouning joyous thing. It's like I'm doing something. I'm remembering, not memory. It's not a store. It's not a thing. It's something that I'm doing. It's a process. It's active.
I'm glad you went first.
Yeah, no. So go ahead.
When I go first, a lot of the time John just ends. We're going, yeah, I'm the same. I agree. So I'm glad John went first because I could just say, yeah, I agree with the last bit. He said, yeah, I agree.
John, you mentioned something last week, and I actually I spoke about this a few months ago because I listened to an album back in my late teens, and it was an album I listened to all the time. I was really in a gangster rap back then, right back in the 90s. It was Ice-T's Home Invasion. I swear I hadn't listened to it at all for 20 years, and I had maybe almost 30 years. And I put it on. I got a bit nostalgic. I don't know where that came from. Just floated up from the ether, and I had this feeling. I'm going to download this album. I knew every beat. I knew every word. I knew every rhythm. I knew everything. And that brings me. You mentioned in a previous discussion this idea of just resonating. This, you're picking up on the pattern and the beat. And you were talking about it last week, John. And as a musician, I'm interested to hear you talk a bit more about that. Is it, do we have this? Did I have all the lyrics in that stored in my brain? I don't
Not a
think
chance.
so. I think what's happened is I've picked up. I have experienced this so much when I was younger that I'm reliving that experience.
Yes. Yes. Very yes.
That's what he does with me. Just great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Do you want to
It's
expand?
very much. It's very much.
I'm just thrilled with the validation.
Yeah. It is resonance. I think that's a beautiful word for it. It's hearing a song. One of the things that I another kind of related but not is my alarms in the morning that wake me up. If I hear that alarm later in the day, I feel like I'm just waking up again, even though I've been awake for ages. I'm like, oh, you know that feeling when I feel like when I'm just waking up, I was like, okay, fine, it's time to get up and go. And that's the same thing. It's that like association, I suppose. And it's the exact same thing with music. I don't think we're storing it in our head. Ask me to recite lyrics, probably not going to happen. But the moment I start hearing a song or I'm interacting with the song in the environment that I'm in, that brings forward the lyrics. And like, oh yeah, this is this. And then I start like it's hard to explain, but I visualize where I was. I see where I am. I remember where I was when I heard that last. And depending on where I am, I perceive different things.
Danny, there was a Canadian researcher. You said that you listened to one of our presentations in Berlin, and you spoke about this notion of resonance in that. And I asked you maybe I could reach out to her, whatever. That's really fascinating to me. I know there's something there, and I know this is like not one of the last dominoes or one of the last layers of the onion, because every time I pull one back, there's a fucking other one. But memory has been this big, coarse layer on the onion.
So when I see people talk about muscle memory or memory in general, we look to rephrase it to remembering. When I think about trying to explain this idea of remembering, we can't look at someone and say they know how to do this thing. There is no way to see, like looking at the screen, I wouldn't know what you could do, what you can't do, unless I actually experience you doing the thing. So it can't be stored anywhere. There's no part of your body or brain or anything that I can pull out and go, right, they learned how to do this thing at this time. No, it's not possible. So when it comes to remembering something, it's an experience. So you remember when you resonate within the relationship you have in the environment. Resonance and synchronicity both tie in well here, because I don't know whether you're familiar with the idea about synchronicity, but if the example that's used in the book that I saw a Veritasium video about, Derek Muller is a physicist, talking about. He spoke about synchronicity as an abstract concept, speaking about it specifically in the ecological approach. If you take a system, so if you put cans on their side so they roll, and you put a platform on top of it, and you put metronomes on top, very popular example. If you tick the metronomes all at different times, they will eventually synchronize so they're going together because the system works together. And that's the way I see us remembering. I see us as a system that resonates. And when we are ticking together, like all of the parts of the system ticking together, we are resonant and we can remember those behaviors, those actions, those movements. So when we are like hearing lyrics of a song, that's where all of the pieces have been put together, and over however long it takes, you start resonating with that memory. It's not a memory, but you start remembering those things, and you can start synchronizing and resonating with the information to adjust your behavior accordingly. And I said to John, when I'm in a car, if someone says, oh, do you know the singer of this? I don't know. Do you know the words? I don't know. But the song comes on and you start to sing the words, but you don't remember all of the words. You remember most of the words, or the ones that you're most familiar with. And it's the same thing when you hear that song another time. you remember the system, you become synchronized, you resonate with the system. John's just resonated with something.
Yeah, I have a big resonation. It's the same when I listen to music, because I play guitar and I play, piano, and I sing. Those are the things that I sometimes hear sooner.
So what are you hearing sooner though? Like
So I'm hearing like the
Did you say
guitar
sooner or more clearly?
more clearly. Yeah, that yes, that's more accurate. I'm hearing a guitar and I can focus. Well, I can attune to. See, there you go. Yeah, I can attune to the guitar, which is very confusing in my head because attune and tune have very different meanings.
Because you're attuning to attractors within the
Yeah,
movement, but
yeah.
tuning inside of music would be, well, I would argue it's the same thing because tuning is vibration energy, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, now we're getting very Deepak.
Oh, we're going deep now. Here we go. Yeah.
Not deep, but Deepak.
Because obviously it's just energy. So you're tuning the energy, which is making the energy resonate with another vibration of energy. So tuning is tuning the resonance of energy towards a specific attractor, which is the same as remembering. We are attuning our actions towards a resonant frequency, whatever that frequency is. Whether frequency is an accurate term there, I'm not sure, but I don't think the ecological approach has a word for that. We were just going to adopt frequency from physics and plonk it
Well,
in there.
I'm gonna throw in another word here, and it's almost like an analogy to see if it fits. And because this, I'm certainly not pulling this out of my ass, but this is what I've started chewing on. This is Blau's book on, and I just love the title, "Perception as Information Detection." Would it be fair to say that expertise is maybe this? It's almost like this. If we think of it as resolution, that it's becoming a finer resolution. And like you were saying, you might hear a song, you don't quite get all the words in that, but had this been your favorite song back in the day, there would almost be this higher resolution. So there's resonance, you would resonate better.
Yes.
Solution. I like that.
Oh, thank you, John.
It's the same as the attractor analogy when you think about you have a blanket and you pull down in the blanket, everything sort of goes down into the attractor. The further down towards that pin that you've pulled, or that bit of blanket that you pulled, the higher frequency, the greater accuracy you would have towards where the attractor actually is. So I think that maps along if we're thinking about 3D graphical analogies here. You've got the blanket and you pull it down. The closer you get to the attractor, the higher the frequency is, because the waves between the distances will be shorter, and that's what higher frequency is. So I think it matches when it comes to attractors, and that's to me what remembering is. So the more you do something, the deeper the attractor becomes, the higher the frequency would be, the closer you get to the attractor, and those with expertise would be able to attune to those attractors faster because of the previous information they've had. And that's where you start talking about bifurcations and get really complicated with maths. But you would be able to, with someone with expertise, move towards those movements far quicker. Whether it is the exact attractor, that's the difference, because if you're pulling down all these different attractors in the blanket, the expert or the person with higher levels of expertise would be able to jump between them easier. I mean, if you think about a ball, if it comes out, it'll be able to drop down another one far quicker than someone with reduced attractors, because it would take longer for the motion to move across. And that's the expertise difference between someone that can shift between those attractors and another, which is the adjustment of movement, which we see in skills. So those with high levels of expertise will be able to move between movement patterns and behaviors faster because of their level of expertise and the, I guess you'd say, depth of attractors. I don't know whether that's accurate, but that's the way I'm seeing that in the analogy I have.
It's kind of I keep thinking it's so I have a resistance to this one because it's relating to a machine again, but it's like the high definition and low definition, high, low, and varying like the from a tech perspective, because that's where I'm attracted to. It's like a high definition view of all this information, and the more kind of attractors you have, the more pixels you have, and the more highly defined it is. But obviously, that is
The analogy is a bit constraining, but
it is constraining, but it is kind of practical. It's easier to attract to because we all have
which
tech that
ties in directly with perception, because when you directly perceive, you have all of the information, so all those pixels are there. If you indirectly perceive, not all those pixels are there, but everyone has all the information. It's whether they it's whether they can attract to the information that's most specific to them at that time, which is where we go back to like the Cristiano Ronaldo heading the football in the goal in the dark documentary that someone would explain it. Oh, he's used all of his past experiences to explain how he can head the ball even though the light's gone out. Or he's just attuned to the information of the person kicking the ball in better than the novice could. Two different ways of explaining the same situation. One of them leans one way in practice, the other one leans another way in practice. Both of them, I think, would lead to the same sorts of behaviors, but it's a different way of explaining them, which is, at the end of the day, what the ecological approach is, a different way of explaining behaviors.
And the other side of the coin, then we have remembering would be forgetting, right? And I think a lot of maybe the stories or the narratives we say, well, what about when someone maybe has some brain damage or they have some issues then that's almost implying that we have this kind of stored memories, right? Just for some of the listeners who might not have heard, you and Julia and that were talking about this notion of the engram. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Like this is where it was stored. It was never ever found.
Well, that is correct. It wasn't found. Yes.
It wasn't found. I was going somewhere with that. Keep talking, John, while I get my throwing you under the bus again, John.
I'll talk about the engram very quickly. So when it comes to the ideas from the traditional approaches, the idea was that it's stored somewhere, and we know neurons are in the brain and electrical pulses are moved within the brain. And the idea was that there is an engram that is somewhere stored in the brain that has those memories, that stores in some way these charges that could be replicated in memories. And there's been quite a few studies in rats and mammals and animals trying to isolate the engram, but it was never found. And that's what Julia spoke about, is the person that came up with this idea, theorized about the engram, said, sorry, I haven't found it, and I don't actually think it's a thing. It doesn't mean people aren't still trying to find it, because they are. And some people prove that they found it, but all they've proven is that animals remember, which we already know.
Another thing to kind of just mention, I don't think the brain has nothing to do with anything. I think that's also a risk.
Has nothing to do with anything. That's simple.
The brain is part of perception as such. It's just not as big of a thing as it's perceived as. It is part of the organism, but it's not the solution. There you go. I got there in the end.
Yeah.
The brain is part of it, but it's not all of it.
I'm obviously getting way too comfortable here that I'm ready really dumb shit down here now. I was having this thought a while back there, and I said to my friend, what if the brain's just like a kind of just like a junction box, and it's just facilitating this loop, this connection between the perception system and the action system. And that's what this plasticity is just kind of rewiring. And they were kind of looking at me like, whatever, Scotty. And but then I mentioned, then I listened to Andrew Wilson talk a little bit about that, and he actually said in a much more articulate way that isn't that maybe the role of the brain, just to pass on information from the perceptual side to the action side.
No, that's the way that I would conceptualize it as well. The way that I see,
and it's constantly reconfiguring through experience.
I wouldn't say reconfiguring, because it means that there is something that has been configured, like there is something that has been saved in some way. So I think it's just an ongoing dynamic movement. Like the brain is obviously part of the organism, so we're always moving. It's in its current future, which is a term used rather than past, present, and future. It's the current future, because we act because of things that may happen, so because of things that have happened and what is happening. So I think the brain is just a dynamically shifting transition box that moves throughout time. And when it comes to forgetting, I would say that it is that a part of the system has been altered, and it has added complexity and difficulty in being able to do the thing again. If you were to take a metronome off of that system, well, obviously that's going to then jolt the rest of them that could be out of sync, and then it's going to take time to put them back in sync. If you've got thousands of metronomes and then you move 100 of them all in the other direction, it's going to take some time for it to actually figure out what's going on again. And I think that's the way that I would try and conceptualize forgetting, is when we're looking at brain damage or something like that. It's maybe something's just been completely taken out of the system where brain damage is degenerated for whatever reason, and they would need to recreate the synchronicity. Does that mean you would then be able to remember older things? In some cases, yes, because we've seen some people with traumatic memory loss, however that is defined,
Yeah.
can still remember things from before the incident, but not remember other things. So using this idea is that, well, there are some parts of that system that help them remember some experiences, but not other experiences, until other connections, other synchronicities, other developments are created. But again, I don't know enough about how the brain actually works. I don't think any of us do, to be able to say biologically what's happening. But conceptually, that's how I would explain it.
So I have a fun question. So can we
I hope it's for
actually
Dan.
can we
I feel like you guys are treating me like this.
You. It's for you.
You treat me like this all-knowing, like, academic person up here. I'm
Can
figuring
you-
shit out.
It's all
just like you
relative,
guys.
Danny.
Can you truly permanently forget something?
Well, of course.
Oh, I was going to say, of course, Danny. Now it just feels like I'm copying you. So you again, I heard you speak a little bit about Alzheimer's and whatnot. That's something I'm always acutely aware of in my sport, neurodegeneration and stuff. Would it be fair or a stretch to say that it's just like a gumming of this junction box, or a natural kind of decay and degeneration of what actually the brain is facilitating?
I think so. I think it's the organism that is, to use a word from dynamical systems theory, it's the organism entropying, so it doesn't have enough energy to maintain its self-organization. So because it doesn't have the energy to do that, energy either to keep the biological pieces together, or the energy to make it function through all of the different energies that happens with an organism to keep it functioning. I think that's what those sorts of things are. Dementia, Alzheimer's, all of those. It's the body entropying to a point that it can no longer function at the same level, or self-organize and maintain its ability to function at the same level. And there are external factors, where I say external from the organism factors, that can increase the likelihood or the speed or rate of entropy. Obviously, being hit in the head multiple times over your lifespan is a factor that could that could speed up that entropy. But to what extent, no one really knows, because we know everyone is slightly different, so their tolerance will be different.
Do you think there's a threshold, or like a capacity that once we get below that, that's where these symptoms start to manifest? I'm sure I've got a ton of brain damage, but it's not quite manifested yet, although it probably has.
Is there a threshold? I don't like drawing lines in the sand, because I don't think there can be, because we are dynamic systems. So we may be able to do something now that actually changes that threshold, but we don't know that, which is where chaos theory, butterfly effects, and all those sorts of things get in there. So I wouldn't say there is a line in the sand, but there is certainly likelihoods over time that would change where things in current future will happen. It's the same as if I move forwards. Just because I'm moving forwards to the glass doesn't mean I'm going to pick it up. I could just change around and not pick it up. And I think it's the same when it comes to forgetting something or getting degenerative diseases. You may be extremely likely to get it because of all of the relationship factors, or all of the factors impacting the relationship between you and the environment. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you will get it. And who knows, maybe you do something that speeds it up or slows it down, but you won't know until you've done that thing. So the way I look at that is predicting it is somewhat not pointless, But because there are so many things that can happen, to me, I wouldn't worry about it. But that's a different conversation.
John, what is attention and where do intentions come from? What is attention and where do intentions come from?
Oh,
I like the question.
I like the question. Yeah.
Don't worry, the audio will be cut, so all the silences are
We'll get
gone,
this
John.
awkward pause. We'll get this awkward pause out of the way.
Yeah. Just. Yeah.
That's all automatic, by the way. I don't actually do that. So
Look, we don't. No, you'd be there for a very long time. Do a lot of it.
yeah.
The final
Right, John.
edit will be
What is-
45 minutes.
What is attention? Oh, it was something that I think Jeff said in our interview that I'm like, yes.
Can you remember it though?
I am in the process of remembering now. But I'm just going to talk it out so that we actually have content.
It is part of the remembering process because
Yeah.
it's an experience.
It was something around the attunement to factors in the environment, like that's the immediate what I've got there is that it's attention is the attunement to environmental factors and how we perceive that and how we perceive actions, and I suppose it's the opportunity for action in the environment, I suppose, or something like that, and how attuned we are to that, which is a beautifully well described explanation. Thank you.
Is it separable then from intention?
I would say yes.
Sorry, I'm sorry, John. I'm being.
Yeah. I
only met you 5 minutes ago, and
that's
feels
great.
like I'm
I love
picking
it.
on you.
Bashing you with philosophically dense questions.
Is it separate from intention? Yes.
I want the perfect answer here, John.
Cool, great, excellent. Then you're not gonna get it.
So was that from an IP perspective or an ecological perspective? Is that the right answer?
Yeah, I think intention. Yes, it is separate. It is separate because intention is almost.
I will try and help John out here for a little bit. So the way
intention would be related to a goal-directed behavior, so it's a constraint. So it's goal-directed, but no, it's not a constraint. It's a goal-directed behavior. It is a goal-directed.
You reacted off my face then.
Yes, of course I did. I attuned to the environment. Thank you.
You said goal-directed behavior, and I was like, yes. And then you said constraint. I'm like, no. And then you're like, no, it's not.
I said it and didn't like it, then saw your face and went, yeah, okay. But yeah, it's a goal-directed behavior. And Danny.
I mean, go. There is this underlying narrative that I have the answers, which I don't, by the way. I am making this up as I go along, which doesn't sound too nice. But yeah, my experience with wrestling with attention and intention is, as John said, very lovely. Intention is goal-directed behavior. It's the direction of perception in whatever relationship or environment it is that you're in, because when you're doing something, you're doing obviously for action, you're perceiving for action. So the intention is I am going to walk out that door. So the perception is therefore attuned to the goal, i.e. walking out the door. So my attention will be directed for my intention being action. So my attention is towards the door. My intention is the action of using the door to leave the room. That's how I would explain it through an experience. When you look at like saying, okay, where is their attention? That is a question that I don't think would be well formed, because you can't know where someone's attention is, because it's always changing. That's like saying, okay, let's give a snapshot, which again, ecologically speaking, it's dynamic, it's ever changing. So being able to identify someone's attention, I don't think is possible. But you can identify someone's intention by the way that they are acting, because it is throughout time. So if someone is walking in a direction, their intention is shown by their behavior, but their attention isn't necessarily shown by their behavior, because they could be paying attention to affordances that you cannot see. Like you as an external system in that relationship will not be able to perceive what they are attending to, because they may be thinking about something like, I don't know, what am I going to have for dinner later? That is where you would argue their attention may be at, or part of their attention anyway, whereas their intention is walking, which you can see their intention is to walk to wherever, but you wouldn't know
presumably
where
their attention is, and not just tripping over their own feet.
Potentially, but again, that's where like saying
Muscle
their
memory
attention.
comes in.
Yeah, that's where, when you say that's where their attention is, it's a noun thing. It's a thing that you can attach to attention, which I don't think we can do. They are attending to lots of things at once. Where the attractor is for that attention is likely going to shift over time. So if, for example, they are thinking about what they're having at like for dinner, their attracted attention will be towards what they're going to be eating for dinner, but it doesn't mean they're not attending to other things happening in the environment. So they can still, like you see the kids walking down the street and they're on their phones, their attracted attention, their focus, if you want to use that word, is on the phone, but they can still attend to information in the periphery to not walk into things, hopefully. So if we are attending to lots of affordances as we act, but I don't think we can isolate attention to any one thing.
This is, I don't know if this is cool. You know, you ask a question just so you can kind of try and answer it yourself. But and I think we're almost going full circle. What helps me is if we go back to the blob, right? The organism. Clearly it is showing intention. That might just be to, you know, exchange energy, feed, reproduce. And its attention is its perception. You know, it has to, whether it's climbing up a chemical gradient or whatever. So when you look at these blobs or organisms in their most primitive form, they're clearly demonstrating intention and attention. Over the eons, have we just added like unfathomably more complexity to it?
Yes.
Oh, thank
Both
you.
of us said yes at the
I
same
think,
time.
I think we can.
Mic drop.
A question for you then, Scott, to
no.
turn the mic.
No, I want to finish off on a high.
To turn the mic in your direction. You started off asking about the relationship between active inference, the free energy principle, and the ecological approach. How would you try and bring either the ecological perspective or the information processing perspective through the free energy principle? Because the free energy principle doesn't subscribe to either one approach. How would you explain that? Yeah.
I really am wholly ignorant. Not wholly, I know just enough to make a real arse of myself here in talking about the free energy principle. However, the implications for, or the practical side and the implications for coaching is, I think, and even with even the traditional, you know, before, I'm not trying to run circles around the question here, but prior to going down the ecological rabbit hole, I read Richard Schmidt stuff on motor learning, very informational processing, right? And that for me was explained a lot of things. So there was a lot of unwinding there. So ask me the question again. Let me buy some time.
I'll rephrase it to maybe give you a different angle. When looking at the free energy principle and the ecological approach, how would you tie those together?
Okay, so again, I maybe skirting around the question here. For me, the practical implications of it, whether it be Schmidt stuff and IP, whether it be the free energy principle, whether it be the ecological approach, is that they all put a lot of emphasis on this tight coupling of perception action. Maybe some more than others. So I think for it kind of ties everything in together. In practice, that we should try to violate that principle as little as possible. So I'm not quite so, and I think this is where I think I could spend the next 3 months trying to get my head around the free energy principle and active inference, which I think it would just leave me even more confused. But I think what I've pulled away, again, going back to the start, that we've cherry picked out, is that perception and action are tightly coupled. So the implications for how I coach and how I approach coaching and learning doesn't really change that much. I know that didn't answer the question at all, but I can't really answer your question because I just don't know enough about it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. John, do you want to give it a go?
Thank you again, John.
Thanks for your insights.
No, I didn't mean that, but thanks for being there with me.
I think
this is one of those situations where I feel, this is just me speaking out loud. John, I did it again. Speaking out loud. You can't speak inside. See, referencing you from earlier. You with me? Anyway, small little dig. So me thinking out loud, when it comes to podcasts, some people listen because they have the answer or they think they have the answer. I enjoy listening to people try and struggle through working out their own thinking, which is why in this conversation, like, even though it sounds like I know what I'm talking about, I'm working it out as I go, which is why I think out loud. And when I hear both of you speak, I'm thinking the same things. Just
So
sort
you're enjoying watching us both squirm, right?
Yeah.
but I do the same thing. It maybe, I mean, do you think I'm squirming when I'm giving answers?
No.
I never think you're squirming.
No, I do not perceive that at all. It feels like you're just like, this is the thing. I know things. Yay.
Sitting there nodding.
Yes, very much so.
Okay, well, answer your own question then, Danny.
Well, no, but that's where I was going. It's interesting because when I ask questions because I don't know and I want to get other people's thoughts on it.
Mm.
And then when I share my thoughts, I then get another response. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe this, that, and the other, which is what happens like between John and I anyway. When I think about active inference and free energy principle are completely separate things. My understanding of active inference is it's related to predictions and information processing and Bayesian statistics and being able to predict a future actively, because we are actively inferring our prediction into our mental representation, which is controlled by our central executive to move. Whereas the free energy principle from Carl Friston is much more of a, we have a thing, an organism could be used, but they use various
Blob.
terms. Yeah, blob. And with this blob, there is energy all over the place, which ecologically we can resonate with. We can say, okay, yeah, there's loads of energy. We would class that as structured energy. And the free energy principle then puts a blanket, a Markov blanket around said organism, said system, and then says the energy outside of that is free. That's the free energy principle. There is an organism, Markov blanket, there is organized, however you want to define the organized bit, self-organized or not, inside of the Markov blanket, which in dynamical systems theory we would suggest is a system. Then outside of that is the free energy. Through the ecological approach, well, because all energy is structured, well, most energy that we would perceive is structured, we can then use that to organize our behavior, self-organization. So the free... Yeah.
Would it be accurate to, instead of structured, would it be constrained? Would that be a more accurate way of putting it? I'm just by the shake of the head, no.
I mean, it's not constrained, it's structured because it's unique. The energy is unique in the ecological approach. That's how we directly perceive. So it wouldn't be, well, you could argue it is constrained, but constrained means that inherently would suggest that you can change it in some way via other constraints, which you can't have an energy in two different ways. That's what's happened to it. That's it. It's structured.
Okay.
It's lawfully structured. But I like the challenge. I like the poke. I wouldn't say it's constrained. I would say it's structured because I think that's a more accurate word to use there. So when I'm looking at the free energy principle from the ecological approach, we could use it and say, as an organism, we use structured energy, which is inside of the Markov blanket, which results in self-organized behavior. And the free energy outside of that is all of the potential things that we could attract our attention to. There's all the other structured light that we are not perceiving at that time. So as I move, I then expose myself to the other structured energy within that environment. So the free energy is the stuff that we are not perceiving. That's how I would try and interpret the two, like the free energy principle and the ecological approach. From an information processing perspective, they don't really look, from my understanding anyway, at the free energy principle as a, I'm starting to lose my voice here, as something that could be used for prediction. They use it as a, we have particles, we need to use those variables, those small particles, go right down to the lower order variables, and then use that for our predictions and the active inferences. So we're using 2 energy particles, which is the number that we use in our Bayesian statistic processing brain thing that can do it somehow, which I don't think is accurate, but that's how they would, I think, use the free energy principle.
Sounds so complicated. Like,
I understood every word of that. What about you, John?
no, I understood everything that he said until you started talking about the.
That could be because I don't understand their explanations, because their explanations are riddled with just
it feels so
convoluted,
complicated and convoluted, as if they're trying to find a solution to something that is it is simple.
Yeah,
it is it's how we directly perceive things happen.
to dumb it all the way back down, blobs act.
Yes.
And the free energy principle could help with that, but it might not. We
And I
don't
think,
know.
yeah, and I think that's how I kind of respond to the free energy principle. I know of it, but I've not looked into it because for me, I'm just like, does it help me? My intention. Does it help me? No. So it's just an idea. Whereas for me, I I perceive. I perceive and I act and I act and I perceive and there we go. And it just happens. That's what we do. And any more just seems to, for me anyway, add complications that aren't really necessary. Add constraints that I don't, at naming things instead of just experience. The noun versus verb thing.
I think it could be useful in academic contexts, but practically
Academic context,
speaking,
yes, but I am very much practically speaking. I work very practically versus up here.
Doesn't
Because
it
obviously we
challenge?
think of it.
Does and the reason I reached out to you, Danny, is because I've had a few of my coaches in my academic network. Not to say I'm an academic, but they're in coaching and academics, for academics or whatever. They have got in touch with me and said, "I think you're missing part of the story here," and they've been kind of introducing me to the free energy principle and active inference. However, go against the isn't that a representationalist perspective? Doesn't it smuggle in representations again, and therefore indirect perception?
free energy principle, not within the principle itself. The way people use the free energy principle can be through both camps. Most people have used it from the information processing indirect perception camps. I think partly because of the bias in academics anyway. Like there are more people studying the Bayesian brain hypothesis and active inference than there is ecological anything really. There are more people on that side for almost all fields of research, so there's going to be a bias towards those explanations. When it comes to actually applying the principle, I think the principle is in the middle. If you want to use it for IP, you can, but if you want to use it for ED, you can. I'm curious as to why the academics would share the free energy principle as a missing part of the story, because yes, it's an idea, yes, it's a principle, yes, it's a theory, but there are loads of theories. So why they picked that one, I really don't know.
Well, I think why they're picking that is because I think as a community, especially in the martial arts and grappling community, they've just come across ecological dynamics. We're kind of as a collective and a group, we're kind of insufferable, and we're adamant that perception is direct, and I think it's the pushback.
Okay. Yeah, why they picked free energy principle to push back on direct perception, I don't know. I would have picked, well, cognitive load theory is an extremely popular theory inside of the IP approach that fundamentally goes against direct perception. It's similar with all of the learning models of stages of learning, and all of those would challenge direct perception better than the free energy principle. But again, that could be my misunderstanding of what the free energy principle is, because it is embedded within physics, not perception. What were the academics studying? What is the field of research?
Well, I don't want to put
Oh,
anyone
no
by name
names,
on
just
blast,
like,
but well, they're studying motor learning and presently in the moment. Now, I feel like when I
oh,
speak with people from the skill acquisition community, they're certainly on the side of dynamical systems and direct perception and ecological psychology. But yeah, there's been several of my coaching friends have sent papers on to me saying, this is something you should look into before you take away some of your surety to speak.
I don't think, I mean, yeah, when it comes to speaking of facts and being sure, no one can be sure because both sides are built off of assumptions. I think this relates back to something Rob Gray said a few months ago now, is that he questioned why so many people question the ecological approach so intently. It's like, if we say something, suddenly we've got everyone saying, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? And they start poking holes. But when they explain something, they then don't give themselves the same criticism. They don't poke the same amount of holes. They go, oh yeah, that's just that thing over there. Well, it's not just that thing. There's a massive hole. You can't explain the central executive. That's a big deal. We can't explain some
That's
of
the whole thing.
Well, yeah. So some
Well,
of the
I
criticism.
think even in general coaching, I'm like the approach, and I think it's because it's novel, it's new, it's maybe out there, that we're held to a different standard.
Exactly. And I don't
It's
think it's
not,
fair.
and it's also not new.
it's new in the sense that it's just kind of somewhat started to get its tentacles into sport.
Well, John, where's the constraints-led approach in anywhere outside of sport?
I've tried, trust me. I've tried looking. God, it's painful. It's painful. It doesn't exist. It's not there. It's just not there.
But that's the point. It is new, but the ideas aren't.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and that's where I think a lot of people struggle, especially with the amount of ingrained terminology, language, and ideas that are in human language now. We talk about memory, and we talk about the mind and the body. We talk about things that are from those assumptions that were made years and years and years ago, and we don't challenge those assumptions, which is obviously what the Jeff and Blau book about Introduction to Ecological Psychology is about. It's about challenging those original assumptions. And I think the challenges you're getting obviously will continue, and I will probably get more of as I start talking more about the ecological approach, which is the goal. Yeah, but the challenges we get, I would kind of do like a mirror bounce back and be like, okay, well, how would you do it? Like, what would you explain this as? How would you explain this as? And from my experience, most of them, as I mentioned earlier, they either don't come back to me or they come back to me and with like question mark emojis or thinking face emojis. Like that doesn't answer my question. So I think they are as stumped as we are, but because we are new, they want to poke holes, which is fine. Yeah.
John, I think we're all on the same page that the mind, wherever it is, whatever it is embodied, is embedded, is extended. Where do flashbacks come from? Just random thoughts of childhood, stuff like that. If we're talking about, environmental triggers, I don't want to pull you into some area that. Be careful what I say here. I'm interested in the experience of psychedelic experiences and stuff too. If you're open to getting into that discussion, or stay away from it, that's fine. So
I
let's stick with the
have
first.
no lived experience of psychedelics, so I couldn't tell you. In terms of like flashbacks, in terms of like deja vu, I think did we speak about it literally today?
Yeah.
You can maybe edit out psychedelics in, Danny.
It's fine. It doesn't matter. We are completely open. What I would rather do is say that we said it and then didn't explore it than not say it at all, because then it's been exposed. And then, like, if people do have something to say, they can then contribute in either the comment section or whatever, reach out and say, hey, we want to talk about this. But psychedelics, I haven't been involved in either, but I think it's a valid conversation. John, I'll let you finish.
I think flashbacks or deja vu, it goes into that current future. Yes, that's new terminology. I've not said it out loud yet. So yeah, is that it goes into that current future. It's that idea of like the past and the future and the thing and all of that is just kind of it's where we currently are, and seeing what is in the environment, or perhaps we've thought about, or the easiest answer is I don't know, but there is that, like, there is something to be said. I'm trying to remember what we were talking about earlier because I said something really cool and I don't remember any of it.
I would start looking at the type of causality that you would typically ascribe to. Linear local causality is what a lot of sciences look at. But when we're talking ecologically, we're looking at non-linear causality. And non-linear causality obviously suggests that there are some things that could cause behaviors that we have no idea, no direct relation to. It's not directly causal. It is abstractly causal, which there are loads of examples of that inside of the book and inside of nature, in ecology and zoology, where you can see things happen, behaviors happen, but there is no obvious cause as to why. They just do. And after studies,
talking about even like instinct, right? I think everyone has an intuitive sense that instincts must be innate. It's programmed into us somehow. But Jeff did a good. Well, I mean, I don't know if he was honest to say, well, they come from somewhere. These behaviors come from somewhere. Just because we can't explain them doesn't mean they're pre-programmed in this chain of amino acids.
Yes. That's where I was getting the question bit from. Yeah, so I wouldn't say instincts are like DNA encoded or anything like that, but instincts obviously come from somewhere. And like you're saying, I think the instincts and those behaviors that come from wherever are non-local, non-linear causality, which trying to trace back is virtually impossible. You wouldn't be able to know. It is quite literally the butterfly effect, the chaos theory, the complexity theory. You might be able to find it, but there could be more than one. There could be 1,000 things that you would never know are related to this thing, but you wouldn't know it because it is this current future that's constantly moving throughout time, which becomes somewhat redundant because you wouldn't be able to figure it out, which is why I think flashbacks appear. Flashbacks appear because of non-linear, non-local, or abstract causal reasons, which you wouldn't be able to identify. You could try and extrapolate a reason why. Oh, maybe I was in this place at that time before and again, but I think this relates to the what traditionally would be called unconscious causes. The unconscious, for me, the way that I try and conceptualize it is unconscious causes are the non-obvious, non-linear causes that we can't attune to. That's how I conceptualize it. But whether that's accurate or not, don't know.
Danny, are you familiar with who Fred Cummings is?
Yes. Good
I
YouTube
think
channel.
yes, I think that is a treasure trove. I spent my whole summer on bike rides listening to Fred. I've had a couple of interactions with him. He's fantastic. He brought it to my attention when we used the word subconscious. So that's kind of just Fred's great, right? But he was saying that's kind of a remnant from Freudian psychology, and he doesn't even he thinks it's all kind of bullshit.
Yeah. Yes. That's where I try not to use it, but because so many people are familiar with the terms conscious, unconscious, it's terminology used to help ground conversation, which is where I struggle in the communication of the ideas. It's like, how do I say whatever ecological thing, but relate it to something that someone can attach to? If you say something very abstractly, they'll glaze over it or gloss, and it'll just words in out in one ear out the other. So how do you bring an attachment to it? I try and use words that I don't like, like unconscious, to bring some grounding into that. But again, that's one of those internal conflicts. I'm like, I don't like using this word and I don't think it's accurate, but I kind of want to use it so I can help ground the conversation to move them potentially from one approach to another. So I agree with Cummings in that it's not useful. But as Harry Hef said, language and terminology, you can be as accurate, as precise as you want, but meanings are essentially affordances. So everyone will have a different meaning, which is why I like the phrase meanings are in people, not words.
And if you had to substitute or a better something to describe better what we all kind of collectively call subconsciousness, what would that be?
Direct perception.
Sorry?
Would it be direct perception?
Come on, John, speak up. You just muttered that under your breath.
No, I'm going to say this, but I
was
don't really
kind
want
of thinking out loud there, but really quietly. Would it just be direct perception? Or non-linear causality, actually thinking about it?
I was going to say it wouldn't be direct perception because that would be conscious because we are directly perceiving. So again, we don't know what conscious is, so we can't know what unconscious is. So I would rephrase those and say attuned to.
Yeah.
So I would I guess do the ecological thing of going, oh, you want to go down that track? I'm gonna go the other way. I'm gonna turn around and go the other way and say something else. So when it comes to subconscious, good question. I would lean towards using explanations from chaos theory, from the butterfly effects, and from nonlinear causality, and would say I wouldn't say subconscious or unconscious because I don't think those things exist. Because the traditional notions of conscious and subconscious is the mind, and the central executive is conscious, and what it doesn't know is the subconscious. But if we don't think it, whatever word you put there, mind, central executive, if we don't think that exists, then I wouldn't be comfortable in saying that, well, we are conscious and subconscious. I don't know what those words would mean to me when making that explanation. So I don't know is the answer, but I wouldn't use those words, either of those words, when explaining experiences yet, because I don't have the
Yeah,
expertise to do that.
I've been avoiding using it myself, but I've just nothing else to describe it.
Yeah, I would lean towards using attention towards attractors and affordances in environments, because that's how we would describe experiences, and that's how I think when people are talking about subconscious, they are referring to causes that they can't identify most of the time. And it's causes of behavior that they can't identify. And when I'm explaining behavior, I'm explaining it through attractors, affordances, constraints, perception, etc., etc. So why we would need a subconscious, I'm not sure.
So would it be fair to say that we have attention that we are both aware of and unaware of at the same time?
I was going to say there are variations of attention, because there is information in the environment that we're not attuned to. Like there is loads of structured light that I'm not attuned to, and that could be a non-causal factor in actions. Like all the stuff that is sort of in the background, I'm attuning to my camera right now because that's what I'm looking at, and it's there. I'm not attuned to it. So if something was to happen, I would need to dynamically change my attention. And I think when I change my attention, now I'm attuned to it. That would be the conscious bit. I'm now consciously attuning to something, but it doesn't mean I was unconsciously I was unconscious of it, because I still know the wall is behind my camera, but it's not mean it's in my subconscious or unconscious. It's just I'm not attuning to it. So again, it sounds like I'm trying to wordsmith around it, but I don't.
No, no, it's not. But you suggested it might be non-causal, but it could also be causal, but we're just not
We're not
aware of it. It's not salient to us.
Well, it wouldn't. I guess you could say it doesn't resonate with the behavior that's happening in that relationship at the time, because we've got the current future. We don't necessarily know whether it's going to be a cause now or later, because technically, as we go, time moves forwards. It's always in the future, so it could be a cause for 2 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 minutes in the future, a cause, but we wouldn't know. And knowing the relation is what science tries to do. But if we can't know the relation, then for whatever reason we substitute in this subconscious, unconscious, we don't know. I would just say that we don't have a linear relation between causes, because it's an unknown cause. Maybe that's the term that I would use. It's just an unknown cause, but I don't know.
Oh, this got pretty well. At least for me, it got pretty deep towards the end. John, I did see you got a
Yes,
round off here.
I do have to dash. I want to just talk for hours. I could, well, we have, and continue. But yes, I do have to dash.
Guys, I really appreciate you inviting me on today to have a chat. It was really fun and interesting for me. You were toying around with the idea again. We spoke about this before you came on, John. Putting out these educational videos in terms that most people could, relate to and understand. I think that's a wonderful idea. I might throw some like questions that I get a lot from my community at you, and it might be something you can play around with and explore. I think, and I do try and share your stuff as much as possible. So you're a valuable resource within our community, and we'll look forward to more of your content at Danny.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Looking forward to the conversation. And anyone else that does want to have on, and you don't have to be like academic, expert, coach, just come on and have a chat. Like I feel like I can come off as intimidating. I don't mean to be intimidating. Just come and have a chat. We're open.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much again. I'm going to do a shameless plug here because Danny, you've been on my podcast. I'd love to have you come on my podcast again and clear up some of these thoughts that I have. But maybe that's a conversation we have in the future.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Plug, yeah. So I have the plug, and Danny's been on it, the Primal MMA Coaching Podcast, which we try to explore martial arts from an ecological perspective.
Nice. Right, closing out the recording there.
All right.